Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Values Voter Summit Advance Your Values Activism Training. Very excited to have you all here. Welcome, especially to those of you who have had to get up early this morning in order to watch this training, and I do apologize for the slightly late start that we've had this morning. My name is Ben Woodward. I'm the Leadership Institute's Director of Communications Training, and we have a very exciting agenda lined up for you today to teach you how to advance your values. So without further ado, I'm going to take a moment to share a very quick presentation with you, tell you a little bit about the Leadership Institute as well as the Family Research Council action, and we'll get started with our first guest in just a moment. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you here so that you can see my presentation. Perfect. So, as I said, this is the Values Voter Summit Advance Your Values Activist Training, which is co-hosted by the Family Research Council Action and the Leadership Institute today. FRC Action, just to tell you a little bit about it, is fighting for the American family. Based in Washington, D.C., FRC Action is the legislative affiliate of the Family Research Council, which seeks to educate elected officials on Capitol Hill in their states and activate their grassroots network. FRC Action, as I said, is the C4 non-profit founded in 1992, existing so that our nation's most fundamental values are represented as we impact public policy, influence elections, and support candidates for election. There's a few resources here available to you, which I recommend you take an opportunity, if you haven't already, to visit frcaction.org, where you can see some of those resources and find out how you can help out the mission. And to tell you a little bit about the Leadership Institute, an organization obviously very close to my heart, having worked for the Leadership Institute now for a little while, 4 years in fact. The Leadership Institute has trained more than 225,000 conservative activists and leaders and students. The Leadership Institute was founded by Morton Blackwell in 1979. He remains our president to this day, provides training in campaigns, in fundraising, in grassroots organizing, youth politics, and communications. The Leadership Institute teaches conservatives of all ages how to succeed in politics, government, and in the media. The Institute offers 48 different types of trainings and schools and workshops, and I very strongly encourage you to take a look on leadershipinstitute.org, where you can see some of the trainings that are available to you. If there's been one small slither of silver lining during this pandemic, it's been that we've been able to reach conservatives all over America, all over the world. So I encourage you to go on the website, leadershipinstitute.org, take a look at some of the trainings available and see what you can access from the comfort of your own home. So here's that link I just told you about. So to tell you a little bit about some of the 48 different types of training that the Leadership Institute offers, we offer campaign trainings that involves the Campaign Management School, Future Candidate School, Get Out the Vote Workshop, and others. If ever you're interested in either running for office yourself, or if you're interested in managing a campaign for somebody else, you'll learn how to handle negative media, how to raise volunteers, mobilize them, and encourage them to get involved in your campaign, as well as how to fundraise for that as well. The Leadership Institute's digital trainings, now these ones that have been a bit ahead of us at the Leadership Institute, these ones have been online for quite some time now. But if you're interested in learning how to do Photoshop, video editing, all these crucial digital skills, essential, the left have been great at this for a long time. Conservatives, we at the Leadership Institute, we're making sure that we're keeping up, or hopefully leading that charge. So learn how to access voters digitally and persuade them. Fundraising trainings. If you want to learn how to raise money either for a candidate or for your cause, for a particular issue, we can teach you at the Leadership Institute how to do that. So I encourage you to take up some of those opportunities. the Leadership Institute's career trainings. Whatever it is that you want to be successful in your career, whether you want to work in a think tank on Capitol Hill, whether you want to learn how to get into the civil service, the Leadership Institute runs a number of different career trainings so that you can figure out how you can get involved in the different organizations that are in this movement. In addition to that, we have the Leadership Institute's communications training. This is very close to my heart. This is the division I work in. The Leadership Institute's communications training, you'll learn how to write speeches and deliver them. You'll learn how to debate successfully and prepare for those debates. You will learn how to write speeches that make an impact in your community. So I encourage you very strongly to take up some of those trainings that are available. Dina Espinchard, who's joining me for our first session this morning, will be able to tell you a bit more about this, but the Leadership Institute's grassroots trainings, for those of you who are not in the DC bubble, and I'm hoping we reach as many of you as possible, you can have the Leadership Institute come to you and do a training in your area for your volunteers and for your activists. So please do take us up on that. As I said, that is at theleadershipinstitute.org/training. Couple more here. So I encourage you also to visit the Leadership Institute Campus Reform. If there's anybody who's watching today who's interested in a career in media or in conservative journalism and you're still in college, consider becoming a Leadership Institute campus correspondent. Report on liberal bias on your college campuses and the attempts by your college's administrations to undermine free speech on your college campus. Campus Reform is here to report on that, and I encourage you to take up those opportunities. I also encourage you to look at the Leadership Institute's resources. We have a number of different written resources at your disposal. And then this one, again, another one very close to my heart. The Leadership Institute has a wonderful employment placement service called conservativejobs.com. It is a totally free service, and I'm saying that to you if you are a recruiter as well as if you are a job seeker. Totally free service, and a fantastic opportunity for you to find out about the different job opportunities available in the movement, whether you're just starting out as an intern or whether you are at the vice president or CEO level, whatever it is that you want to do. I encourage you to take a look on conservativejobs.com. You can also request a free personalized career consultation through the Leadership Institute's conservativejobs.com, where we'll sit down with you, go through your resume, your cover letters, help prepare you for interviews, networking, whatever it is that you need help with. Book a free career consultation today. And then finally, I'm sure it hasn't escaped most of your notice, we are very close to an election right now. I cannot believe how close it is. So as we come up to the election, now is the most important time to do some of those trainings. And of course, consider volunteering as a poll worker. With plenty of Liberals volunteer for this. We need more Conservatives volunteering for this. If you are interested in volunteering to become a poll worker, the link is here. And I know that these links will be shared with you by Leadership Institute's Director of External Affairs, Carol Cox, who will be sharing those with you. And then I think that pretty much covers it. Follow us on Twitter, follow us online, Instagram, Facebook. We're on all of them, so consider following us. During the course of these presentations and the three guests that we have today, if you do have any questions that you'd like to put to our speakers, I'm going to be monitoring audience Q&A throughout, and so I encourage you to use the Q&A option available to you, use the chat option available to you in order so that you can take advantage of those. So without further ado, I think that gets us to hopefully teach you a little bit about Leadership Institute and about FRC Action. I encourage you to use those resources. So I'm going to go ahead and shut off my laptop, and I'm going to then pull up a couple more things right here. I want to make sure that I have everything I need so that we can view your view your questions as we go along and as we speak to our first guest, and that is Dina Espenscheid. Welcome,
Ben.
Dina.
Thank you so very much.
Dina, we've worked together for a while now.
4.5 years.
4.5 years. It's
Yes.
been an absolute pleasure. I'm
It
thrilled
has.
that you can be here today to do this interview. So thank
you.
you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. We're thrilled to have you. So, Dina, I'm going to go ahead and just open with a quick question. So, just to begin with, can you tell us a little bit about you, about how you got involved in politics, and of course we mentioned the LI's grassroots
Yes.
services, what you do at the Leadership Institute?
Absolutely. Well, at the Leadership, I'll start at the end and then work my way to the beginning. At the Leadership Institute I think I've got the best job in the building. Sorry, Ben. No offense to the other departments.
I'm glad you feel that way.
I've got many years of experience of working in politics out in the field, and so as my job as a director of grassroots coalitions, I get to travel around the country, meeting with groups, meeting with leaders, and then setting up the trainings that you all do in the building. We set them up in communities, and I get to go out and actually bring the knowledge that I've built through the years out into the communities, to the community groups. Now, how I got this position, everyone's like, oh, I want to work there, and I ask how many years experience do they have? It took me 16 years before Leadership Institute paid attention to my resume and hired me for this position. And I actually, way back in college, I was getting a biology degree because I thought I was going to work in biological education, teaching little kids about the environment. And one night, actually the election night of 2000, I just realized this isn't the path I want my life on anymore. I want to, actually, it was the pro-life movement was where my heart and soul lied. And I was like, I need to go to Washington, D.C., and I need to make an impact on the right to life. So following that, I ended up in South Dakota working for a group called the National Abstinence Clearinghouse, but they had a sister organization called the Alpha Center. And there I was working in public policy, and I was kind of a policy wonk, and I was helping build and helping inform these abstinence educators all about why kids needed to remain abstinent until marriage and how to promote that to their teenagers. And one day my boss walked in and she said, Dina, I really need you to go to this GOTV training because I was supposed to recruit people for it and I need you to go. And I was like, oh my gosh, she wants me to be on TV. Finally, she's realizing my true potential here. So I showed up with my prettiest outfit and my prettiest face on, ready to learn how to do interviews, and I learned all about door knocking. GOTV does not mean go on TV, it means get out the vote. And as I was sitting there and listening to them talk about door knocking, I realized that while I had been working intently at, I'd been a lobbyist up in Pierre, which is our state capital, that the best way to pass the legislation I wanted passed was to change the legislators into people I wanted to legislate. And so I immediately left there and I started door knocking. I started volunteering on political campaigns and really giving it my all. So I would work my 40-hour work week and then turn around and volunteer for another 40 or so hours on whatever campaign was going on. And just made myself helpful for whatever the campaign needed. I filled in those roles. And it worked. We got people elected, and then we were able to get our stuff passed. And so that's really how I got my start. It was just volunteering on political campaigns. Little does my poor boss know that when she told me to go to the GOTV training, she took me from being a policy wonk to a campaign addict. So.
And that must be really rewarding as well. It's such a jump to go from biology to politics, but it must be so rewarding. It's very tangible work, isn't it, politics? You can see the benefits of what you do, especially in grassroots at LI right now.
Yes. Well, I've got to put my plug in for people to get biology degrees and science degrees, even if they're thinking about going into political science. And it's because the sciences teach you how to think and how to be critical of the information that you're bringing in. And that was a lot of what I was bringing to the campaigns I was volunteering on. But it's so wonderful to work on a campaign because you know what the deadline is, you know what your goals are, and you know you have to get it done now. Now, I happen to thrive under high stress, high pressure, tight deadlines. And so that really, it's addictive. Like I'm going to be taking time off in October to go up to Michigan to volunteer on a political campaign. Because I truly feel that we need to be involved at the grassroots level. The political campaign I'm volunteering on is for State House. It's not the presidential, it's not the U.S. Senate, but it's at a level that actually makes a difference in the lives of the people of Michigan. Family friend, so I know the campaign, I know the candidate, but it is win, lose, or draw on election night. I know I'm going to give it my 110%, and I couldn't give any more, so I'm not going to look back with regrets.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's absolutely great. And my next question here, I was wondering, kind of, what have you seen or done in your career that realistically our audience can do that's been most helpful to the causes and campaigns you care about?
Absolutely. What have I seen done? In 2016, again, I took time off of work and I went up to Pennsylvania and volunteered on a campaign. And that was, I think, some of the most rewarding door knocking. And I know people are afraid of door knocking. What if they hate me? What if they don't like me? What if? Most of my time either spent on volunteer campaigns as I was building up my resume, or as paid positions, was working with the volunteers and training them up and teaching them how to do it. And so what I always told my volunteers is that even if somebody's mean to you at the door, be nice to them back. Well, first of all, because if you're Christian, you think God's called you to help on elections, then every time that they're mean to you, it's like a little mini persecution, and blessed are the persecuted. And if you're nice to them back, it's like heaping coals on their heads. But that's the way the little jokes and the biblical jokes that I would tell to boost my volunteer spirit. So I always think of that stuff. But then the door knocking is so rewarding because you get to see face to face the voters who realize, oh my gosh, this candidate really does care about my issues. These people really do want my vote. My vote actually makes a difference, because there's so many people out there thinking, well, out of 5 million voters in my state or 18 million voters in my state, my one vote won't make a difference. Florida came down to 526 votes or something back in the year 2000. I was involved in an election up in South Dakota that came down to 6 votes. I had one. That election with 6 votes, I was the only volunteer on that election. And so every time I went up to Pierre and I would talk to that legislator, whatever I wanted, I got. Not that we were already philosophically aligned, so it wasn't a problem for him to say, yeah, I can vote on that, Dina. But the people that I worked with and the people that were on the opposition can never understand why this man had such great respect for my thoughts and my ideas. Well, I knocked on 200 doors. If you figure that for every 16 or so doors that you knock, you get one new voter, that means I made the difference in whether he was going to be up there or somebody who was a pro-abortion radical was going to be up there in Pierce, South Dakota. And so going back, sorry, I got a little spaghetti on you. I apologize. My brain went everywhere.
Fascinating. Doesn't that just show 6 votes?
6 votes, yeah. But the story I wanted to get to was I knocked on this door, and I saw that the House, because you get the app that I was using, told me they lean Democrat, but they might be open to switching. So I knocked on the door, and the woman was like, well, what campaign are you with? I said, well, I'm door knocking for this senator and for this presidential candidate. I'm the Republican. You guys can figure out who that was. Okay, but the Leadership Institute, 501c3, we're not telling you who to vote for. We're not endorsing. Anyway, so when I knocked on the door, she's like, oh my gosh, we're so excited to finally meet you guys. We've been waiting for you to come. I'm like, what? And she's like, she told me about how she is a union employee that works at a grocery store, that every grocery store worker in the grocery store is going to be voting for my candidates. She's so excited. Oh, and my daughter turns 18 next week. How do I get her registered, because registration closes tomorrow? Let's do this. So I ran out to my car, I grabbed the registration sheet, we got her registered, and she's like, any chance do you have a hat? I was like, as a matter of fact, I do. So I snuck him a hat, I give him a hat, and that was the 16-year-old, or the young woman who was turning 18, that was her birthday present, and she was so excited. Normally I have a rule, you don't go into the house. I went into this house because we were filling out the paperwork to get them registered to vote and everything, and it was just so amazing. And the woman, the mother said to me, we've never voted for Republicans in our life. We're conservatives, but we've never voted for Republicans because we're union members and the union tells us what to do and gives us the information. But once we started reading for ourselves, we knew. And she was just waiting for somebody to come and ask her for her vote. And that face-to-face interaction at the door is so vitally important. I've even gone door knocking now during COVID times. Last weekend, I knocked on over 800 doors. I got myself a blister on my finger.
Oh, wow.
See that?
No.
It does exist.
That's commitment.
That was commitment. Because I have this thing where you've got to, and I learned this from some of the best door knockers in the business, but you want to create a curiosity hook in people's minds so that they come to the door. So I don't knock like that. Ow, that hurt. I knock. And then I wait. And of course I step way back, especially now. But people open the door, and it works because they're curious as to who is the fun person knocking on the door. And that's why I got myself the blister, because it's, a lot of knocking.
Something that anyone can do. I mean,
absolutely.
Even if one doesn't have time to commit 40 extra hours on top of their 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
Even just a few hours, as you say, it comes down to 6 votes.
Yes.
And, I know that just having somebody ask for their vote, even if it's a candidate I disagree with, I actually can't vote in the States, but back when I was in England, even if it was a candidate I disagreed with and I had no intention of voting for, I always appreciated being asked. It meant something.
Yes. Well, you don't have to door knock, although door knock is great because you get that face-to-face interaction. And last week I did have a woman say, well, normally I always vote for this candidate, but they haven't been by to ask, so I guess I'll vote for your guy. I was like, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Vote, yeah. But the phone calling is the second most important. So if you can get to a phone bank or do a virtual phone bank from home, just getting on those phones. And people are answering their phones right now. They are answering their doors right now because we're hungry for that human interaction. And so by having that conversation with somebody and saying, will you vote for my candidate? And then when they commit to voting for your candidate, they're making a commitment. I just did this presentation on persuasion that's up on our on-demand platform, leadershipinstitute.org/on-demand classes. On-demand classes is the slash. But I did this persuasion class, and the act of saying, yes, I will vote, or yes, I will do something, creates this commitment in the head, and then you have to follow through with it. There's like this psychological desire to follow through. So the more we can get people to commit to voting for our candidates, the more that we can actually turn those people into voters and votes for our candidates.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And so, this is a great segue, but say our audience is not registered to vote right now.
Yes.
Let's say they don't want to mail in. How do they go about doing it?
Absolutely. Well, to find out if you're registered to vote, I've got a cheat sheet sitting on my lap. Vote.gov, so vote.gov is a federal website where you can go in. It's linked to all the state's voter databases, and you can put in your name and your zip code, I believe it is, and it will come up with whether you're registered to vote, and then you could double check to see where your address is. This is something important. A lot of people, especially young people, will move. So for those parents and grandparents that are out there, if you've got college students or young people, I used to say like me, oh my gosh, I've lived in the same place for 5 years now, but I used to bounce around and move like every 2 or 3 years. Have them double check to make sure they're registered at where they live now. Because if they're not registered where they live now, when they go and show up to vote at the local polling station, they're not going to be registered there. They're going to have to go on a hunt across the county or the state, or goodness gracious, if they're registered in another state and it's too far away, then they lose their ability to vote at all. So that vote.gov is where you can go to check to see if you're registered. One of the most shocking things to me, Ben, is to find out what percentage of the American public is not registered to vote. And they say these crazy things to me like, well, if I register to vote, they're going to call me for jury duty. Guess what? I got called for jury duty on April 1st of 2016 in Newport, Kentucky. I had not been registered to vote in Newport, Kentucky for 10 years. And so April Fool's on me. I'm not showing up for jury duty. I don't live there anymore. I'm living in Virginia. And so my mom had to call them up and tell them, hey, by the way, she hasn't lived here, and take her off the poll, or the group that you might be calling from. Yeah. But they will find you for jury duty whether you're registered to vote or not. So register to vote. There's no excuse not to vote unless you've got deeply held religious commitments or some sort of criminal activity in the past. But basically, if you're eligible to vote, you need to get registered, and you need to get registered in the next few days because the window for registering the vote is closing in some states. The other thing I was going to say that's really shocking is the number of faithful Christians who go to church every Sunday who don't who are not registered to vote. And so if your pastor will allow it, and they should because it's a nonpartisan thing, set up a register to vote station at the back of church, have the forms there, make it easy for people, and then make the announcement that if you need to update your address because maybe you've changed addresses, or if you just want to update your party because maybe you've decided you don't like the political party you're in states where you register by political party, or if you're not registered to vote and you want to register to vote, we're in the back of the church. There are some state laws that govern who can do this and what can do this, so look into those state laws. But the vast majority of states, anybody can collect a voter registration form. You just have to commit to turning it in regardless of who or how the person filled it out. So if they filled it out to be a Democrat and you're a Republican, you still have to turn it in, and make sure you do turn those in before the deadline.
So thank you for that advice. I just think it's so easy to do, and going around Arlington, there's so many booths now outside the metro everywhere that's getting people signed up. So there's loads of places one can do it.
Absolutely. And you'll notice you said all around Arlington. Well, I live in a more conservative area. Yeah. The liberals aren't in my neighborhoods registering people to vote. They're in Arlington, which is a heavily liberal area,
That's absolutely
registering
right.
people to vote.
Yeah.
So they're out there trying to find their people. I need you to go where your people are. And the reason why I mentioned church is because we know that anybody who goes to church every single week is so much more likely to be a conservative than a liberal. So hit those people up and make sure they're registered.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we have a question here from, we have a couple of questions here from the audience, so I want to get through a couple. So one person asked if I could say your name again, which is Dina Espenscheid.
Perfect, yes. Perfect. Dina Espenscheid, I am looking to marry out of it.
After all these, if anyone's watching.
Sorry, that is a joke I tell when people mess up my name just to put them at ease.
but yeah, I mean, Dina Espenscheid, Director of Grassroots Coalitions at the Leadership Institute.
Yes.
Hopefully I can get it right after 4 years.
You're wonderful.
But I have another question here.
Yes.
Which, here we are, let me find
it. My email, if anybody wants to reach out, is Dina, DENA, @leadershipinstitute.org. So if you want a training in your area, contact me, and somebody in our grassroots team will get out. So DENA @leadershipinstitute.org. Sorry,
Fantastic.
Next question.
No, I love this question here. This comes from Lucy, who asks, you only have a few minutes at the door. How do you know what to talk about that will move them to vote for your candidate?
Actually, Lucy, you only have a few seconds at the door, unless you've got a Ring doorbell, and then you just kind of hold up your stuff. A lot of campaigns now will be working with a voter contact application, and they're either going to give you paper or they're going to give you an iPad or an iPhone, or have you pull it up on your phone, and that will tell you, which voter you're trying to target in the household, how likely they are. It's called the affinity, how likely they are to vote for your type of candidate. So are they a hard R or hard D? Are they libertarian? Are they somewhere in the middle? And then they might say what types of issues they care about. Now, this late in the game, most campaigns are just straight out door knocking people who they know are friendly and asking them to vote, because we are in a full court GOTV press, get out the vote press. And so I know I said I did 800 doors. That is a remarkable number to do in one weekend. I have never done that many doors before in my life so quickly, but we were in very compact neighborhoods, so it was townhomes, and it was very conservative neighborhoods. So they didn't even give us a list. It was just knock on every door. So it was super simple. You knocked on the door because there were 2 doors on the doorstep, waited for them to answer for about 10 seconds. If you didn't hear anybody moving, you moved on. But if you're, whatever the campaign that you're volunteering on, they'll kind of tell you, here's the message that we're sending today, because they know what type of voters they pulled. So if they pulled a list of pro-life voters, they'll tell you we're going to be talking about pro-life. If they pulled a list of Second Amendment voters, they'll tell you we're going to be talking about guns. And so that's the best way. Early, so starting November 5th, give everybody off on November 4th, but starting November 5th, people who are thinking about running in the next cycle, and for Virginia, that begins in January. For other people, it begins the day after the election, basically. You could start door knocking and doing something called voter ID. And during voter ID, what you do is you're just trying to figure out who are you and what issues do you care about? So Ben Woodward, you've just become a citizen, you're a new voter, and I don't know anything about you. Because I know you live in Arlington, which means you're probably not one of my voters, so knock, knock, knock. So Ben, do you realize there's some elections coming up in November? Great. Here's a list of candidates. Do you recognize any of their names? Fantastic. What issues matter most to you? And then Ben's going to tell me legal immigration, probably pro-life, God, guns, and family, that type of thing.
Taxes,
and I'm going to be like, fantastic, so happy to find you. By the way, I'm the conservative too.
Yeah.
You don't, during voter ID, you don't necessarily say, hey, I'm voting here or I'm volunteering here for such and such a campaign, because you're just trying to figure out who they are and what they care about so that you can go back over the summer and say, hey, you care about these issues, we care about these issues, can we get your commitment to support our guy? And then you come back in the fall and say, hey, you told us you were going to support our guy, make sure you go vote.
Listen, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think we have time for, let's have a look, what time is it here? I think we have time for just one more question,
Okay.
if that's okay with
Yes.
you, Dina. And I want to make it another audience question.
Okay.
The left-leaning group Vote Forward is leading a letter-writing campaign to disengage Democratic voters to encourage them to vote. They prepared 1 million letters this week. Are there any conservative groups doing this so that we can get involved? I think that's a good point. Are there any conservative groups outside of just the specific campaigns, like C4s, anything like that, that are, reaching out to disengaged voters?
1 million letters, huh?
Yeah,
I have got this most genuine smile. My eyes are crinkling and my cheeks have gone up. I can't even hide it anymore because I don't care. How many times do you get an envelope in the mail and you look at it and you throw it out right away?
No, that's all the time.
So they have done scientific studies. I'm a biologist. I love the science, right? I get excited about the science. They have done scientific studies and we know what works. Mail does not have an impact when it comes to getting out the vote because there's so much of it. Our mailboxes are flooded with it right now. So, oh good, they sent 1 million letters. You know what, here's the deal. If you want to sit down and write handwritten letters, you can. Scott Presler, who a lot of people know, he's got long hair and he stands up there and he loves Donald Trump. He's an old friend of mine. I knew him when his hair was short. He's been handwriting thank you letters to people that he knew, that he knows he got identified as a Trump voter. Yeah. And he's written thousands and thousands of thank you letters since the last election. That's great, and I love that. And I think Scott is leading the way, and it's fantastic. I don't know of any conservative groups that are having people write letters saying, will you get out to vote for my candidate? Because we're doing what we know works based on the science, which is the door knocking and the phone calling, and now the personalized text messages. So I've gotten an email or a text message that says, hey, Dina, this is so-and-so from this group. Did you want to ask for your absentee ballot in Florida? Yeah. I said, am I still registered in Florida? He's like, oh, whoops, sorry, wrong old list, but you can check your voter registration here. I want to cover 2 more things. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt this
no problem.
thing.
We have one more minute left.
This is my I voted sticker because I voted this week in person. Simplest thing in the world. I accidentally drove into the vote on your, what did I do? I drove into the vote from your car lane. Took me 10 minutes. And so if you can vote in person early, please do that, because what we want you to do then is to go and either work a poll. You can get paid to work at the polling locations. And by the way, that is, sorry, I'm going to look at my cheat sheet here. www.eac.gov. E is in Edward, A is in Apple, C is in cat.gov/voters/become-poll-worker. And that is the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission. They need people to actually help open up the mail-in ballots and make sure that it's a legal mail-in ballot, and they need people at the polling locations to make sure that the polling and the voting goes well. Yeah. So I want you to vote early in person so that you can then either work or you can volunteer for a political campaign. And then the last thing that I thought was really cool, something I forgot to mention earlier, I got into politics because of my grandparents. My one grandfather was very pro-life, was the head of Northern Kentucky Right to Life. The other grandmother on the other side was Eagle Forum. They didn't tell me I had to do this. They just impressed upon me all the time, here are the values that matter to our family. Here's the things that matter to our family. My grandmother would have me look at the Eagle Forum, Phyllis Schlafly's letter, every month when I went to go visit her every week. And these are the things that put the nuggets into my head that said, I care about getting politically involved. And that's what drove me into this. So even grandparents who are like, well, I can't do anything, I can't door knock, you can talk to your grandkids about the issues that matter most to your families.
Excellent. Well, with that, and just a quick reminder as well to everybody who's watching that to go on leadershipinstitute.org/training to learn how to do these things in detail.
Yes.
And learn those skills necessary to make you an effective activist. And continue to learn from Dina and other excellent speakers. But with that, Dina, I can't thank you enough for joining us on a Saturday morning.
I loved it.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is a real pleasure to see you again in person, Ben.
Likewise,
Thank you.
It's been too long.
Yes.
And for the benefit of our audience, I had a couple of people ask if I didn't
Yes.
mind going through the schedule as well. And I apologize for not doing that at the beginning. So just to tell everybody a little bit about what we're going to be covering over the next couple of hours or so. So obviously we just had Dina Espinchide, our director, Leadership Institute's director of coalition, grassroots coalitions. Our next speaker is going to be Joel Grew, and I hope I haven't mispronounced that. I'll have him tell me if I have. Who's going to be talking about the 5 steps to promote your values at City Hall. And then he's going to be speaking from 10:45 until 11:30, and then from Eastern Standard Time. And then from 11:30 until 1 p.m., we're very lucky to be joined by Beverly Holberg, who's trained with the Leadership Institute on a number of occasions, who's going to be teaching you about how to message your values to your audiences and make sure that you're having an impact. But right now, Joel has joined me. Joel, did I pronounce your last name correctly? I hope I did.
Not quite, but no one gets it right. I've been mispronounced since I was in first grade, walking on the stage for the school play. So
how do I pronounce it?
It's Grewy. It's
Grewy.
Just add the E at the end. Yep.
Okay, Joel Grew, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Ben.
I'm gonna go ahead and introduce you,
Sure.
and then I'll let you take it away with your presentation.
Thank you.
And then throughout your presentation, for the benefit of our audience, I'm going to be monitoring the audience Q&A. So Joel, I can either do that throughout or do it at the end, whatever.
Feel free, if there's questions that are appropriate to the moment, feel free to interrupt.
Perfect. So you all heard that, audience, ask away, and I'll put as many questions as I can to Joel Grewy. So Joel is the Executive Director of HSLDA Action, that's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association Action,
Yep.
and Generation Joshua. He has 2 decades of experience in teaching, in public speaking, and in managing volunteers. He has 20 years of ministry and political experience to inspire a generation that, in his opinion, will change the world. That's you guys. Joel has helped train more than 30,000 students and deployed more than 10,000 volunteers who have reached more than 6 million voters in 179 races. He's also a city councilman in his hometown of Purcellville, Virginia. So he's going to talk to you today about the 5 steps that you can use to promote your values in your community. So without further ado, Joel, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So when you say the stats, I admit I kind of head scratch and go, wow, I didn't realize I'd done that. It's been kind of an interesting ride. But one of the things that's really interesting is that when most people think of politics in America today, we think of politics in terms of the national question, right? We talk about federal politics, we talk about the Senate, we talk about the House, we talk about the presidency, the Supreme Court even, at least at the moment, a fair bit of that. What we don't think of often is our city or a town, or even our county. There's obviously politics involved, and they can be dramatic, but they tend to be small scale, often are viewed as petty, to be honest. Maybe if we're thinking politics, we're thinking statewide races. And frankly, when we get asked to be involved, for most conservative activists, for most members of either side of the political spectrum, when they're going to get involved, they're getting involved on the matter of state to even federal politics. The issue is, and the one I'd like to address to you today and to our audience, is that frankly, I would suggest you get involved at your local level. And I would strongly commend that sooner rather than later, because frankly, I think your local level of politics is going to be the crucial aspect for most people to get involved. And frankly, it's the easiest entry point, and it has a huge impact beyond what most people think, okay? Local government is where most of our leaders, not all, but many, kind of get their, call it sea legs, they kind of get field tested on their principles and values. Do you really believe that you want lower taxes? Do you really believe in people's individual freedom? Do you believe in property rights? Do you believe, or are you willing to say, no, you can't do this thing with your property because I want to do this thing here in town? Those lessons, do you believe in the First Amendment, Second Amendment, et cetera, are most often actually fought, those big national ideas that we value so much are often fought at the local level, not the federal or state level. Most of those, honestly, in most federal level cases, there's already provisions for First Amendment protections, Second Amendment protections, property rights protections, et cetera. Where those battles still get waged today is at your local town hall, your local city council. Practical example, our town has about 10,000 people in it, okay? It's a typical small town. And thankfully just enough outside of the DC bubble that it feels like a small town. And when I first got on council a couple of years ago, we were working on putting together, I think it's a wine and food festival. So all the local wineries and all the breweries and all of the local kind of gourmet places were getting together in our city park, and we were going to have this amazing kind of day festival. Okay, fine, great, a very typical small town kind of celebration, right? But on the way through, the local volunteer committee that was working on putting this together decided that they didn't want politics at the event. Now, they were raising money. In fact, they were looking for sponsors to pay for it. Everyone had been involved, everything from C3s to C4s, nonprofits, local volunteer groups, the local insurance agencies, all the local, building supply companies, all these groups are there, and they're sponsoring these events and making it happen for the public. But the only group that was prohibited from doing it was any political candidate or committee. Now, was there any intention of misconduct on the part of the committee in trying to remove politics from the event? No, not intentionally. They weren't out to violate the First Amendment, right? But they did, or at least they almost did. We got in front of it and said, no, you can't do that. And they were all utterly amazed that, believe it or not, the master document that governs our entire country applied to the local city park. In fact, it very explicitly applied to the local city park because that's public land, right? And these battles get waged on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis, and most often they're in fact waged on the lowest level. In fact, most litigation on our constitutional freedoms happens from small towns, because that's the most likely place someone's going to screw it up. There's not the defensive systems put in place to make sure they've been vetted through before they happen. So my point in saying all this is it is worth your time to be invested at the local level. It might be that this is where people get tested. It might be that these are where these battles actually get fought the most often. And frankly, it's so accessible in scale that your impact will be far broader here and far more long-term than it will be on state or federal politics. And I'm not saying don't get involved in those. I do those as a daily basis. The stats you mentioned earlier are that. But that local engagement magnifies your ability to have an impact, and frankly, it's easier to get in, okay? The bar to entry is really small. So anyway, that would be my argument for why go local. I'd like to kind of take you through a couple ways on how to go local. There's a couple different practical things to impact your town or your county process. It can be, this will apply to a city, it'll apply to a town, it'll apply to your county. Once you get to kind of the state level stuff, it'll be a little different. But for local politics, they have a handful of things that they desperately need all the time. I've never met a town, city, or county that doesn't need this, and frankly are glad for the help. First of all, almost every one of those entities has committees that need volunteers, okay? If you want to be involved in your town, okay, find opportunities to show up and be there, okay? It might mean that you are walking into town hall and listening to the discussion. or the council chambers or committee hearings, whatever it is. You'd be amazed how often it is that people are looking for public input and how little public input it is. So, for example, Tuesday, a couple nights ago, I spent $15 million. Okay, by vote, right? Okay, this was the budget. Like, we're appropriating $15 million for a small town of 10,000 people. That's a lot of money. You know how many people showed up for that, to see what that happened? Two people. One of them was there, and for the record, both of them were there for a different reason. Neither one of them cared about the budget. They were there for a different issue because we were doing police reform. Go figure, okay? Ironically, that was the level of interest that was in the town's operations. And frankly, if one person shows up and says something, everyone on council takes notice. Why? Because no one ever talks. And for most electeds, they want to hear what their constituents have to say. And so when you show up and speak, and it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be eloquent, it doesn't have to be practiced, you will have a huge outsized impact on what those people think, because frankly, they're hearing from you. Now, can you do it by email? Can you do it by social media? Sure, you can. But when you show up in person, that is wildly more impactful than if you're showing up online, right? Because what is it? You hide behind a keyboard. Everyone's like the online warrior. You can say whatever you want. No one can really follow you afterwards. But when you do it in person, they see you, they get your name, and then they listen, and it's incredibly powerful. Real practically, most decisions in a town are often made by obviously the voter, the elected, right? But those people are often guided by the people who put them into office and the people who bother to show up. And there's often not many. And if you want to have an impact in how things work, show up at town hall. Show up at your council meeting, show up at your committee. Most committees, actually no, in Virginia at least, but almost in every state, committees and council meetings and elected meetings are always open to the public. We have sunshine laws, FOIA exists on a national and state level in every state, and it's an opportunity for you to go see what's going on. And even just showing up, you'd be amazed. Practical example, this was a year ago, we're discussing something that would cost the taxpayers millions of dollars, okay, long and short of it. No one's there to hear about it. It's literally just the staff who are paid to be there and the electeds who were elected to be there and no one else. And then one person walked in the room and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, it's a public person. We should ask that person what they think about this. And so all of a sudden, this person who just walked in to see what was going on is suddenly being thrown information, and 7 council members are asking questions and the town manager's asking questions and it's like, well, I think this. And their general principle became a guiding element because they were there in how we worked out that policy. It took, the barrier to entry was get in your car and drive down. That was literally all it was. It took almost nothing. Now, I'll note this. We are conservatives. If you're watching this, I'm going to assume you're conservative, right? Okay. Granted, anyone can watch, but we assume that. Interestingly enough, when you get to local politics, fair warning, it is not always aligned in the left and right way that we think of it, at least as far as national politics. There definitely is some of that, don't get me wrong. But often you will see people who, in fact, local politics often has the non-political positions in it still, where people don't have a party affiliation. They're elected, but it's without any sort of connection to a particular party. You get in there, and you're going to find people you can work with that, frankly, you disagree with on the national levels. When I came on council, I had a couple people that I agree with a lot. One of them is about as conservative as I am. One of them is a little less conservative than I am. I haven't met anyone I think who's more conservative than I am on the council. And then there was one guy on our council that was on the absolute other end of the extreme. So if I'm about as far to the right as you can get, this guy's about as far to the left as you can get, and let's just say that Hillary Clinton was utterly too moderate and unacceptable to him. Okay, that's where he was. And yet we found ourselves voting together 80% of the time, 90% of the time. Why is that? Because he believed in responsive, limited local government. He believed in balancing the budget, in having low taxes if possible, and having good constituent service. Well, that got fairly straightforward, and honestly, for a town, you're not dealing with national trigger issues that often, not often, and both of us had a vested interest in keeping it local and clean. And thus we could find agreement over and over and over. And that built bridges all across an area where if you end up getting involved in a higher office, people said, yeah, you can work with people who disagree with you. You can find points of agreement. That can be really powerful going forward. So how do you get involved to impact local politics? Obviously, you have to show up, right? But the next, show up before there's a problem, okay? Politics is not firefighting, okay? If you show up when it's on fire, you might get it put out, but it would be a whole lot better if the fire never was caught, right? Okay? This is why we don't leave gasoline and matches around in the house when we have small children, right? It's a horrible idea. Except we tend to do that in politics all the time. We ignore it until it's on fire. And then you're like, oh, look, politics is on fire. Every time I look at it, it's a dumpster fire. Well, the only time you look at it is when it's on fire. And when it comes to local government, we get ourselves in all sorts of trouble because we only show up after the ship has sailed or after the thing's on fire, and it's really hard to undo that. Go beforehand. Every local town has committees and community events and working groups and task forces and public input sessions. Take the time, take your kids. I'm always thrilled when I see the Boy Scouts showing up because one of their requirements is they go see how it happens, right? Great. More groups can do that. I mean, COVID makes it a little harder, right? But you can do it online even. You don't have to be there. We've actually had more public input via our GoToMeeting or Zoom accounts right now than we have in person traditionally, but that's added an opportunity for input. Be there, speak, listen, and do it before it goes horribly wrong.
On this point, actually,
Sure.
while I've got you, so a great comment here from Sally. She says, I used to be very involved with council meetings in San Antonio, Texas. I met with each council person separately and made my elevator speech. They don't have much time. The mayor recognized me at events when I appear. So how do you kind of engage your local officials as a kind of a member of the public and get them to listen?
Sure. I would call it, basically the principle is the 3-meeting rule, okay? If you're going to interact with a local elected, okay, the first time you interact with them at whatever the event is, introduce yourself, say hi, my name is Sally, shake their hand, whatever, or not in COVID, but whatever that thing is, have that interaction and give them the elevator pitch, right? And she just said she did that. Great, give them the elevator pitch. And then find the next thing they're gonna be at in a couple weeks and go there too. And then you're like, hi, my name is Sally. I'm sure you don't remember me. Every elected worth their salt is like, oh, of course, Sally, I remember you. They don't remember you. But they want to. They're not so much lying as trying to remember you in the moment. And then you give them the pitch again. They're like, oh, right. And then they probably remember what you talked about, but maybe not your name. Third time, you show up again. And this time, they probably actually do remember you. They still may not have your name. Some of us are better with names than others. But they probably do remember you. And after the third meeting on an issue, particularly if you're not a lobbyist, and because electeds have events beyond just the council meeting, right? So find those. It might be your PBA meeting, your business association, or your picnic, or your local festival. About the third time you meet them, they go, oh, this is an influential member of the community. I should know this person. They care, they matter. I should talk to them. And that's usually what it takes to start a relationship. But maintain the relationship beyond complaining about politics. If that means that you're saying, hey, I'm having a barbecue, and you invite them, they'll be tickled. No one invites them unless to have them speak or to kind of give weight to some event. You just want to invite them to come and meet some people. They will enjoy that. It's not hard.
And you talked about the elevator pitch here. I had a good question from Marcia. I have to admit, I couldn't have answered this until I started working here. She just simply asked, what do you mean by an elevator pitch? And
Fair.
Do you have a good example?
Elevator pitch. The amount of time it takes to go from whatever floor you're getting in on to whatever floor you're getting off on and explain something. Really short, right? You're talking maximum of 30 seconds. If I work with homeschoolers, which I do in my day job, right? You show up and you say, hey, my name is Joel. I represent the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. We represent 100,000 homeschooling families that's skyrocketing in COVID right now. We are here to ask you to make sure that the government does not interfere with home education. Oh, that's all it is. It doesn't. You can add more, of course, and there's details and all sorts of policy proposals, but it's the short version, the simple one, okay? The big idea, who you are, why it matters, and then you're done. Now, you'll want a 30-second, you'll want a minute, you'll want the 5-minute version. There's different versions of this that goes along till eventually it's a full-blown speech, but the simple encapsulation of what you want, why it matters, and who you are, as tight as it can be, and then you expand as you have availability and time. That's all. And honestly, most electeds have more stuff in their head than they should. They don't have time, so the simpler you can boil it down, the more likely they're gonna remember it. So when they show up, they actually do remember you.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Great. All right, so moving on. We want you to show up. I want you to be on a committee, volunteer. Most committees, most parts of towns have huge sections that are reserved for community engagement, community membership, et cetera, on these committees. You may have to go through a process. Often you can just apply and they put you in a pool, and as they find openings, they start handing out these positions. I think we interviewed 3 weeks ago, I think 9 people for committees. Every single person went on a committee. Those committees can actually spend money. They can dictate policy to some degree. They can direct the town. They do study and research, and they advise council one direction or the other. And frankly, once you're on that committee, people go, oh, they're willing to put in the time. If you actually show up, do show up. If you sign up for a committee and you don't show, you're done. Just know that, okay? But as long as you're showing up and you're participating, and they don't take that much time, then when you go to do something else, they're like, oh yeah, we know this person, they have a reputation. They're a known commodity, they work hard. That's important, okay? That will do a lot to who you are, it'll do a lot to your reputation, and it will do a lot to layer down why they should listen to you. Now, once you do that, you're volunteering, you show up in advance, you're showing up at town hall, whatever those events are, just to listen, to talk. But you'd be amazed how often just listening will do wonders for you. Because after the 4-hour council session or whatever, people are leaving and you're like, I listened to that entire thing. And honestly, you say that to an elected and they're gonna be, oh yeah, what'd you think? All of a sudden you have your opening, well, everything was fine except this one thing. That seemed odd. Oh yeah, that is an interesting thought. You have that opportunity just by physically being there. Now, last thing, when you decide something has to change, on the local level, frame the change in terms of local questions, okay? National politics will not often resonate at a local level as well as local issues, okay? So for example, if we're talking about budget funding and allocation, tie it to what we're spending money on to something that matters locally, not to a big national initiative. You can, but those local initiatives are often what people are going to care about the most. We as a small town believe this. If you're in a rural area, often they're like, we don't want the large box stores coming in because that disrupts the small town, okay? Now we're talking about a question of what's appropriate for development and growth, but it's framed in the terms of local narrative. It's like, we are a small town that believes in supporting our families, okay? We can talk about issues related to family, but understanding that's been tied now to the character of, we are a small town filled with families, of parents with young kids. We want to support them. And all of a sudden you can have that conversation that might be a politically major issue on a national level, but it's relevant to the community you're in. And so if you can frame your concern locally, you're gonna have a lot more traction for people to listen to you, even counselors who would normally, or electeds that would disagree with you, even staff. So anyway, all right, let's say you get involved there. Next thing, when you get into this, there's some prep work you need to do, okay? You need to know what you believe and what that means, because we're gonna get into that for a second, before you show up, okay? So this is your homework piece before you decide to go get involved. Most of us have things that motivate us. Often, those things are in disagreement, okay? Most people have not thought through how these things come into play. Practical example, okay? You wanna talk about a thing that gets people riled up in a small town. Believe it or not, land use is usually one of them. Where does the store go? Where are you putting the wastewater plant? Why are you putting the sewer plant behind my house? This rapidly gets people caring. Why are you putting a cell tower behind my house? Where's the school go? Why are all the school buses going down my street? All of these things, right, have huge impacts on local quality of life. What's interesting you'll find is people will say, I really don't like this thing and I want it to happen, I don't want it to happen. But they're also like, but I believe you should be able to do what you want with your land, or you should be able to do, we believe in, high level of respect for property. Okay, great. Have you thought through how those principles collide? And have you thought about how those principles essentially don't work together? Because if there is a disagreement, you're gonna have an issue where you believe one thing and another, they're not in alignment, and all of a sudden someone's gonna start using your own words against you. So figure out what you believe and how that logically works its way out to your issues. And you may discover that you're like, I believe two things that do not agree. That's never pleasant, but it's healthy for you to have figured out that and started coming up with a solution before you show up at a public event, a public session, and you're speaking, and someone from the dais says, well, you believe this, but you also believe that, and now you're having to figure it out right on camera, okay? Figure out your values, figure out how they apply locally, and figure out when they're consistent, or how to make them consistent. If they're not consistent, you will have an issue. Practical example, town. You get someone who very much believes in certain types of activity, economic activity, property rights activity, up and until it's right across the street from their house, in which case they no longer believe in the thing that they've been talking about for years. That makes someone look at you and go, hypocrite, okay? Practically, you'll see people who are like, I believe this general principle, but I have my pet project that runs against that's local. Those things, okay, degrade your ability to speak clearly and for people to understand what you believe. Get your principles, figure them out, and then apply them equally. I think it was Scalia, the late Supreme Court Justice, who mentioned that a good judge will find himself or herself making decisions that she doesn't like. Why? Because the law means that. I don't like this outcome, but it is what the law says. That same idea applies in terms of beliefs or principles. I believe this, thus that. I don't like that, but this I believe, and I believe it's true regardless. So figure that part out. Now, that being said, there's going to be stuff that's the principle level stuff, and then it works its way down. There's principles, there's strategies. The principle is the big idea. Freedom of speech, for example, big idea. Strategy. How do we have freedom of speech, okay? How do we advance this idea or protect that idea? Opinion. I think this, you think that. It's not at the level of principle, which is the big idea. Strategy, how we accomplish the big idea. Opinion, it's how I prefer it, right? Is it blue, is it red, okay? Can we put a mural here, should we do it there? Are we making it out of marble, are we making it out of, that sort of thing. It's opinion. Find those things you believe that you can legitimately believe, but that are opinions. Where when the push comes to shove and you're having to choose between your principles and your opinions, or your opinions and your strategy, or whatever that thing is that's kind of higher up on the tree, you can jettison the lower one for the sake of achieving the higher one. Okay? That's really important, okay? Moving down.
If I could
go ahead, please.
jump in with one question here.
Sure.
I say one question, I've had 3 separate people ask this, so
Great.
I really wanted to ask it. It's a good question. How do I find out where my local government's meetings are, when they're scheduled?
Oh, of course, of course.
Website or?
Almost always, your local town government has a website, okay? Look it up. Look up your town, and then if you put your town name and then space .gov into Google, it will probably find it, because almost everyone in Hamazet has a .gov website, right? And then there's usually a section. Any town worth their salt has a section that says, electeds, town council, mayor, whatever that happens to be, and then meetings and schedules. It's always there. You can find it. You just have to go look, okay? Now, do make sure you're looking at the right place, because most of us live in what we call overlapping jurisdictions. You have your town or your city, you have your county, and then you have your legislative district, state stuff for the House, or Senate for your state, and then of course federal. So you'll usually have 5 or 6 levels. Start with your town, okay? And then go find it there. Usually you're looking at someone that meets once or twice a month. That's average for a small town. You might have bigger towns where they're meeting more regularly than that, but they usually list every single one of them. There'll probably be a calendar with all the different meetings and events and where they are and when they are. So,
Thank you.
If not, there will always be someone dedicated at your town hall or whatever city hall that you can go to and say, when does it happen? And they will have that list and they can give it to you. In fact, I think they're obligated to in most cases. So, there you go.
Thank you.
All right, last thing. Identify the things you want that you would consider a vanity project, okay? There are always things people like to do that are not that important. Okay? Most electeds have a thing that they believe personally they really want to do. Most people have a thing they really want done. Identify what those are and recognize that they're vanity projects, that they're not the big principle thing. They're not the master strategy. They're not even opinion. They're just, I really like it. Be willing to let that go, because if you can't, you will sacrifice things above it to achieve a small thing, and you will sacrifice the big things. So figure out what you believe and put it in order. That makes sense? Cool. All right. There is kind of that what do you believe thing, okay? Moving on. Sorry, I need to grab my file here because there's 2 things that I might go out of order. So I apologize to the people running the tech for a second, because I just realized that this is not going to go the way I wanted it to. Right. I should mention this. When you get involved in politics, almost always you will find that the local politics is incredibly personal, okay? That's really good in one sense because it's easy to have that connection. You've seen them, you see them at the store, etc. The downside is if you said something that you regret, you see them at the store and you see them at the park, right? The danger of vitriolic statements, emotional statements, hard lines being drawn, swords being drawn and crossed, please not literally, although there's a few towns that I wonder every once in a while, that can haunt you, okay? There are people I work with that come and speak at our council and at towns and whatnot that have conducted themselves in ways that have removed my ability to trust them. And as elected, if you are acting in such a way that is unprofessional, okay, that is petty, or that is out of control, you will often lose your ability to speak, okay? That gets really dangerous really fast, okay? Remember the people that you're arguing with or yelling at or swearing at, depending on how this thing goes, please don't do that, you will probably see at the grocery store. You'll see them at Chipotle. You'll see them at the drive-thru, okay? That gets real awkward. Practically, that means you need grace, okay? It sounds like it's more of a religious term, right? Than it is something that we think of in terms of politics, but oh my word, it is needed in politics far and above many other things. I mean, don't trade your principles, okay? But we often assume that anyone that is in disagreement with us, even on the most petty thing, okay, they are all of a sudden the enemy, right? In fact, that can be sometimes the town hall, like the staff. Sometimes it's the elected, but oftentimes it's just someone who's never heard your side, okay? So few people get involved locally that they often haven't heard the other side, okay? I have this on a regular basis where I'm having conversations with my town staff who have never considered something other than what they've heard. They're busy, they're swamped. Most of them are overworked. And most of them have more, now I know we don't believe that government you get overworked. Ironically, in the administrative elected box, often there's a huge list of to-dos and not enough time to do it. We'll debate like transportation crews later, but road crews. But most citizens coming in often make the assumption that the staff are the enemy, and that is rarely true. Most staff are genuinely dedicated to helping their constituents. Their methods occasionally need refinement, and they may not understand how best to help them. Often you will see, and this happens at the federal level, right? They try to help and they actually make it worse. Okay, this is a thing. So understand that you can show them grace, you can appreciate their effort and their motivation and their heart to help people while completely disagreeing with how they do it. But if they don't feel like they're being backhanded as you come through the door, they're more likely to be willing to sit down and revisit how they do the thing. Most things, you can find some sort of compromise on the way through, okay? Remember to act with grace. The other thing you should remember with that is that we have this habit of looking at government, and this happens no matter the side of the political spectrum, no matter where you go, no matter what country you're in, to look at government often in terms of a conspiracy. Okay, it's a thing. And conspiracy theories are they're the weeds in the lawn of politics because they show up all the time, okay? Let me just tell you this. Rarely, almost never, not never, I've seen them, okay? But almost never is local government engaged in a massive conspiracy, or even a small conspiracy, to be honest. And there's a couple practical reasons why. Frankly, they're not coordinated enough, okay? Think about it. If your DMV cannot manage to figure out how to get you a driver's license, okay? I'm pretty sure they can't pull a massive conspiracy. They generally don't. When those things get tried, they turn into scandals and they explode. Why? Because nothing holds. The amount of pressure required to pull off something like that breaks. Granted, it's great for news coverage, but most governments can't do this. However, if you treat the staff and the electeds as part of a grand conspiracy, you will shut down your ability to speak with them. You will shut down their willingness to listen to you and your ability to actually edit policy because you've essentially put them in a box and they go, oh, you're crazy because you can't tell that's not true. To be fair, with the internet today, it is easy to find conspiracies. They often are not true, particularly not in government, local government, because frankly, they're overworked and there's a bunch of whistleblower protections. And it is really hard in the way we built our government, particularly when we build it with, competing interests against each other, for a conspiracy to work its way all the way through and be successful. It generally doesn't. Not saying it can't, but don't jump to that boat until you've got some hard evidence. People come in firing and everyone's just like, that's not true. And you lose your capacity to speak. So,
if I can jump in with a quick question
Please.
here. It's very on point. A good question here from Gail. So you had talked about, being cordial to others and everything.
Mm-hmm.
What if other people are not cordial to you? We see these
Sure.
days, on social media, people are very quick to get personal, get quite unpleasant. How does one handle that?
With grace, and you stay cordial. Okay. If you can hold your composure and your kindness and your poise under fire, it will say that position you've held is genuine. If you only hold it up until someone shoots at you and then you go rawr at the person, people go, that was just polish, right? I mean, because most people, even the ones with the least control of their temper, understand enough to be able to polish themselves to look good briefly, okay? It's when someone pushes on them that it snaps, right? Well, that means for you, people are going to push on you. So be ready for that and don't snap, okay? Now, how you do that, there's a bunch of different strategies on how that can happen, that's fine, but find a way to know that you're going to be shot at, that people will disagree with you, and let them, okay? I think partly we tend to be a control freak where we have to get people to agree with us, and that generates a reaction that's over the top. The other time, it can just be a kind response where you're like, obviously we disagree. Nonetheless, and you can recognize their disagreement, you can even defend their freedom to disagree. That's something that I find really cool, because we often try to shut down disagreeing points of view, and the end result of that is that people feel that they've been attacked back. As opposed to saying, you know what, I love that you can disagree with me. I wildly disagree with you, but I love the fact that you can disagree with me, and I will defend your right to do it. Then they're like, oh, because you can communicate your care for someone even when they're in opposition, and that's weird today. And that will leave a mark in a great way. All right, that's what I got. Any other questions before we head out of here?
We have a few. Let's see what
Okay.
time it is here. So we have 8 minutes for questions.
Great.
So we'll try and get through as many as we can. Let's have a look here. Excellent. So this is a good question here, which is when you talk about evaluating your principles to ensure they ensure they are cohesive.
Sure.
Are there any tools out there to help you get through this process?
There are. There's actually, in one sense, there's many. In another sense, there's actually very few. So that's a not terribly helpful answer to that question. Let me try and explain. There are many tools to help you identify what you believe. And they can be, there's quizzes, there's profiles, there's books, there's assessments, that regard. Those will give you structure and framework. And email me, I'll have my contact information at the end, I'll get you lists of those, and give me an area you're interested in, and I'll find stuff for you. But if that just gives you framework, the work of taking, here's what I care about, and then putting it up against those ideas, you're gonna have to do that. That happens on an individual level. There is no system that lets you do that. And evaluating just the stuff that's your opinions or your small stuff, that's gonna require you identifying what you really want. And sometimes that's harder to do because we don't like to admit we really want the thing. So there's some self-diagnostic work that frankly only can be done by you. But we'll go from there.
Makes sense. We have another question here from Kathy, who asks, how do you change your strategy when 100% of the elected officials are of an opposite party? Or I'm wondering if Kathy here is from California. I'm just guessing.
California, New York, there's options here, right?
What about when you're really up against it?
Okay, so a couple things. A practical example right now, we are dealing with essentially an attempt to defund the police in our town. Okay, right? Like that is the topic du jour right now, so let's just recognize that it's a thing. Now, do I want to defund the police in my town? I do not, okay? My town happens to be rated the safest town in Virginia, okay? It actually won the award statewide. Great, how do we do that? We have engaged police that are imperfect, but they're good men and women. They're engaged local at the community level, they deal with the small stuff before it becomes big stuff. Great things. We've got an amazing chief. Okay. At the same time, they're basically understaffed and overworked for the amount of money we can resource to them. Coming in to defund someone that's already overstretched doesn't end well. So what do? We put together this committee that's reviewing it, and then we said carefully, okay, first thing, we're gonna make sure that committee, because it was gonna happen politically, so we said, let's put it from a oversight role to an advisory role, and we made the case for that, and that was agreed to. And then we said, let's make sure that those people would not be getting access to IA files or victim files, and we took the arguments and concerns we had and put them in framing that everyone agreed to. Now, we don't want the witness of a rape victim to be handed to some random committee of civilians who can go take it public. That's not appropriate. And they went, oh yeah. And we found arguments that crossed the political lines to make that go forward, okay? We cast it in terms of local narrative, okay? And all of a sudden, we got to a place where I could even vote for the committee. Not gonna vote to defund my police, but I can vote for the committee and actually look at it and go, yes, now that we're done editing this, it is actually a viable help to our law enforcement. Whereas before, it was actually designed as a punch to our law enforcement. And that's just line by line edits and casting the arguments in terms that are distinctly unpartisan. If you fire it in a partisan form, it will be heard in a partisan form. So do your best to do so. Find people that agree with you, even when they're from political parties. Look for points of agreement. You will find them, believe it or not. If you believe those aren't there, you won't find them, but they are there.
Yeah, those building coalition skills are critical.
Exactly.
I should say, when it comes to something like defunding the police, I mean, the police unions, for example, are going to be your friend on this issue.
They are.
You know, so there's
Yep.
always the allies in the most unlikely places.
They are.
Yeah.
The gentleman I worked with earlier, his name was Chris, and Bernie Sanders was acceptable, okay? But there were some points where we're just like, no, it's obviously this way. Like on the question of what is appropriate measures with COVID restrictions. He found himself going, we live in a farming community. This is like, and he's looking at the rules going, this doesn't make sense for the environment we live in. And I'm like, you know what? We agree in this. That makes a lot of sense. But he's coming at it from a very different perspective than I was. But that's okay. We got to a common point and we could agree and work together as a result.
Thank you. I think that's a very, very important lesson. So we have time, I think, for probably about one more question, and this one's from Donna, who says, it may not be a conspiracy, but what about corruption, which can be rampant at many local levels?
It can.
You know, how do you tackle those vested interests?
Corruption gets addressed 3 ways, okay? First, FOIA is your friend, okay? The Freedom of Information Act, the Sunshine Law, whatever they call it in your state or your federal stuff is your friend. You can actually acquire huge amounts of records. Like in our town, you can literally see every dollar we spend, every receipt it's spent on. Corruption often comes in terms of money, right? So get the receipts, send it to the local press, okay? If there's corruption in that regard, sure. If there's conflict of interest, most states have some sort of disclosure of fiscal interest. Read them, check them, look at them. If they don't, advocate for them, because most people, doesn't matter what political side you're on, if someone says, are you for corruption? They're gonna go, no, and they'll look at you kind of weird, wondering why you asked that. Great, there's your point of common ground and you move forward. Beyond that though, make sure there's accountability and transparency and that your local electeds understand you expect them to take their role as essentially the board of directors or the oversight entity as well as the legislative aspect seriously. If no one cares, that will degrade, okay? Show you care and they'll start asking questions. Honestly, you often look like a hero when you're able to uncover something like that. Most electeds, they wouldn't mind having that moment in the spotlight, so invite them to do so. You'll probably find 1 or 2 that do it.
Absolutely. And can I ask you as well, Alex, I want to give you a chance to talk a bit about HSLDA action and the work that you do. What resources are available to people through you? How can HSLDA, our viewers, assist your organization?
So HSLDA Action is the lobbying arm of essentially the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So our job on a national level is to advocate for educational freedom and educational choice. And right now, with schools and COVID and all the rest of it, we have become kind of essential, more so than we thought, because you would not believe how often people are trying to regulate what happens inside a home under the guise of education. Yeah. That is not okay. Okay, let's just call it what it is. And this idea of educational freedom and educational choice, and that the government is not the primary driver of education or is not the primary authority of education, okay? That it's the parents is what we advocate for. So find us at hsldaaction.org. If you're working with young adults, The other organization that I run is called Generation Joshua, and it is a civics education program for high school students. And we teach them how government works. We teach them why it works that way, which is just as important as how. Understand the why, or you're liable to get rid of the why. So remember that. We teach those. We teach how they get involved. We're going to be involved in the elections this year in powerful ways in dozens of states. I've been neck deep in it right now. It's a great way to learn government hands-on, and you learn it by doing, and we'd love to be the people to help with that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joel. I think Beverly is set up. I'm getting the thumbs up. So,
great.
Joel, let me take this opportunity to thank you so very much for being a part of this today, for speaking to our audience. It's a pleasure to hear from you, and definitely encourage our viewers to check out HSLDA Action and Generation Joshua and use some of the resources that are available. But for now, Joel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It has been a true pleasure.
And for the benefit of our audience, our next speaker is going to be Beverly Holberg, who's going to be teaching you that absolutely critical matter of how do you actually message these values that you have, and how do you reach those audiences. So I'm going to do a brief introduction for Beverly, tell you a little bit about her, and then I'm going to let Beverly take it away. As always, continue to put your questions to the audience, to Beverly through the audience Q&A and through the chat, and we'll take questions at the end for Beverly. So I do encourage you to take advantage of that. So just to tell you a little bit about Beverly and her background. So I think, Beverly, you've worked with the Leadership Institute longer than I've been here, for sure. So Beverly is the founder and president of the District Media Group, an expert media coach, lecturer, and public speaker with almost 2 decades experience. She's trained members of Congress, CEOs, policy wonks, reporters, nonprofit movement leaders, you name it. In addition to that, she is a fellow at the Independent Women's Forum and a guest columnist for the Daily Signal, Washington Examiner, and The Hill, and a frequent contributor on Fox News and CNN. Beverly, really excited to hear you talk to us today about messaging, so I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be able to communicate with all of you and talk about something that I get to do on a daily basis and that I really enjoy and love, and that's talking about how we can communicate in an effective way, especially on issues that these days are considered very offensive to certain people out there. So the hostility when it comes to religious topics is pretty fierce, but I don't think I have to tell you that. I think that's something that you're aware of. I think that's something that you know. So in my work with District Media Group, I'm often working with people who are working with a religious organization, or they themselves are running for office, and they are people of faith who want to talk about these issues, whether it's a pro-life message, whether this is a message on transgender issues, on women's issues. How is it that we talk about it? I know that when I few years ago really started getting into some of the messaging related to this, it was about the marriage issue with the Supreme Court, and that was one of those really hostile, hard issues that came up, and I learned a lot in messaging that. And so I'm going to share with you some of those techniques. I'm going to use some specific examples on topics and talk you through it. And like what was already mentioned, I'm going to be taking questions at the end of this, so if you have anything specific that you are curious about, that you want some help on, whether it's messaging, or if you have a tough question that you need to deal with, please think of that question. I'd be happy to answer at the end of it. So let me just start with the context that I'm coming from when I think about helping somebody prepare messaging for a public speech, for a media interview, for whatever happens to be maybe an op-ed. There are a lot of different communication scenarios. The first thing is that I'm always thinking of how can I get the average person out there to agree. So I know I can speak to people who have a similar faith than me. They already agree with me on so many of these issues. But let's say somebody who's not necessarily religious, where can we find common ground on certain issues? I know that there is a tendency as people of faith to have a righteous anger about what is going on. I understand where that's coming from. I did an article a few years ago that kind of lays out the context from where I'm coming from in talking about issues of faith to a secular audience. It was called What Would Jesus Do on MSNBC? You can Google it. It was through the Daily Signal, which is the Heritage Foundation. And I had 3 main points in how we should develop our messages. One is, don't speak to just people on your own side. Don't be in a silo. Don't just be in an echo chamber. Actually reach out to people who disagree with you, or people who haven't thought about these issues and are undecided on how they play out in a policy standpoint. So if you want to even think about from a Bible standpoint, even Jesus went and spoke to people who disagreed with him. His disciples chided him sometimes for doing so, but that was one of the things that he did that's all through the New Testament, is talking to people who disagreed. I do think that there is an important aspect to all of this where we should go out and speak to people who disagree with us. We shouldn't just be speaking in a silo, speaking to people who agree. The second thing is that he rarely got mad, but it was always on purpose. So I know sometimes with these issues, we have this understandable righteous anger. But if we come across angry all the time, if we don't come across as people with compassion, that actually is going to negatively impact our message and negatively impact the goals that we're trying to make. So much about communication is trying to connect with people. And yes, it is about likability, and part of that is trying to connect with them in ways that they care. And so even though I can easily be understandably upset about abortion, I have to make sure that the way I'm talking about it isn't immediately cutting people off from wanting to hear more. So can I connect with them on things that we can agree on, such as infanticide being wrong? I can get people who aren't people of faith to agree with something like that. Let's have a conversation there. So we need to be very careful about our demeanor. Again, Jesus got mad very rarely. There are only 2 times in the New Testament. It was always on purpose. And the last thing is that he spoke in parables. And that means we need to be storytellers. It's connecting to people with stories, with anecdotes that they can relate to. And so I always think the context we should come in should model what Jesus taught us. And so that means is no matter how angry we may be about things, no matter how much we really want to save babies, let's say, we do have to come to people in a kind and compassionate way, knowing that there are some exceptions when righteous anger is possible. So I want to give you some tips to do that. I'm always developing messages to try to get the average person, so somebody not of faith, to say, that's a good point. I never thought about that. That wasn't something that I had considered. Can you get people to do that? So I'm going to start with the messaging. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how that relates to, let's say, a media interview or a public speech. So some of the techniques that you would use in those scenarios. So the first thing you need to think about when you're developing a message is, who is your audience? So are you speaking to people of faith, or are you speaking to a secular audience? So how I even started this presentation today, I started it with anecdotes that related to people of faith, because I know that I'm talking to people of faith in this. If I wasn't, I wouldn't have used some of the examples in the one article about what would Jesus do on MSNBC if I was talking to people who weren't of faith. So always thinking through, who am I speaking to first? Who is this audience? And then what are the talking points that are going to connect with them? So again, it's thinking through of this issue. We'll just take abortion, for example. What's the area where people can agree with me? I mentioned infanticide, or a few years ago when we knew that Planned Parenthood was selling baby body parts. Even if somebody considers themselves pro-choice, I think many people, even in that situation, would agree that that's wrong. Or maybe you can talk about the taxpayer-funded angle. Even if somebody is personally pro-choice or thinks people can be, they may say, yeah, I don't think taxpayer money should go to it. So can you find the common ground with people? Is there an attack line you can take? Something I often say to my clients, they'll develop a talking point, and one of the things I'll say is, well, that's true, but do you think that's compelling to somebody who may disagree with you? Is that your common ground? Is this a battle you can win? Sometimes we think about trying to win the whole war, and I think it's important to take individual battles and focus on those. So I'll give you another example. Let's say the transgender issue. One of the areas you can often get people who may vary with you on perspectives on how this plays out in policy and issues related to transgender individuals is they might agree with you, and more likely to agree with you on biological men shouldn't be allowed to play in female sports, that's unfair. Or they might agree with you that young children or children shouldn't be able to take hormones, sex change hormones, without their parents' knowledge, that a school shouldn't be able to make that decision without parental involvement, or that even children should wait till they're adults to make adult decisions like this. So I'm not even going to start with the argument of whether or not I think somebody should do this in general as adult. I'm going to just talk about children, and that we shouldn't be giving these hormones, giving estrogen to boys, testosterone to women, or to young girls without them being an adult and being able to make this decision for themselves, especially since often the parents are cut out of the decision-making process, and especially because it could lead to permanent damage, including sterilization. So just thinking about those, you can get more people in line with you on those common ground areas. So stick with that common ground. Think through, what is it that's going to connect? What is it that's really going to get the average person to agree? Sometimes we just give out our whole arsenal of facts, and it's really about targeting it to people. And so thinking through that. And this is where organizations like the Family Research Council and other organizations can be of help, because they do have polling. They have polling that shows what does communicate to the average person. Sometimes we get so involved in a specific issue area, it's hard for us to know what is going to be compelling to somebody who doesn't agree with us on issues of faith. So figuring out what those are, and part of this is just being strategic. This means that you have to put in the work if you want to do this well. Figuring out what works. So many organizations in DC and across the country have really great resources and messaging that you can use. They want you to steal from them. It's not really stealing. They're like, please use our messaging and take it from them. The Heritage Foundation is another organization you may find some talking points that are helpful with them as well. But in developing messaging, the technique itself is, like I said, you want to connect, find those issue areas that connect, but I really encourage you to think about it as far as examples. What's an example you can give to illustrate your point? I find that that's just really, really helpful. So I gave you a couple already to illustrate the point. One is to talk about the baby body parts. That was an example. The other example I gave was giving hormones and estrogen to minors. That's an example. Sometimes we just stick with the top line message, which is we shouldn't be allowing teachers to exclude parents from these decisions. And that's true, but often if somebody is not in depth in this issue and haven't thought about it, they don't know what's going on, they are not aware of the extent to what's going on in schools, and you have to give that example to help people understand what you mean. Because you could say, somebody may even agree with you that parents shouldn't be left out of this process, but then if you can say, and it's shocking, that while a child can't get aspirin without parental signature in certain states, they can actually be given estrogen. And that shocks people to find out that example, that anecdote. So really try to think of your specific examples that you are going to use. So example is one technique that you can use. Another technique you can use is to use comparisons. So again, if people are not fully aware of specific issues, sometimes it's hard in a short amount of time to give them context for it. So a comparison is an easy way to give context for an issue area without you having to use too many words to do so. So one of the comparisons I like to give on abortion, and I've used this in public speeches before with people who disagree with me, is talking about how the abortion laws in our country allow for abortion much later on in pregnancy than the majority of countries across the world. That we're actually in the category of North Korea when it comes to abortion, that most countries in Europe do not allow abortion past a certain amount of weeks. And that shocks people. That really shocks people, because when we talk about limiting abortion in this, in our country, especially thinking about when a baby feels pain in the womb, some people can think that we're just radical, like this is radical, because they assume that every country has similar abortion laws. So really laying out that no, actually, the United States is very extreme with what it allows when it comes to abortion. And most countries are appalled that we allow something as late as infanticide, for example. Most countries do not allow for it. Putting that comparison, putting that contrast in, gives so much context to it and can make people say, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize it. So when people then call our perspective as being extreme, it's something you can point back to show that that isn't the case. Another thing you may want to think about in developing a message is a way for you to use data well. So I think sometimes we like to inundate with data too much. We give too much information out there. I think that one or two data points can be really, really powerful to prove the point that we are making. You can even use numbers as a comparison. So I'll give you an example of this. When we were a few years ago talking about whether or not Planned Parenthood should continue to receive taxpayer-funded or tax money because we found out that they were selling baby body parts. There is a big push by those who were proponents of Planned Parenthood out there to say that if you shut down Planned Parenthood clinics, you're shutting down healthcare for women, that women aren't going to have anywhere else to go. And so you must be anti-woman because you're trying to shut down Planned Parenthood. One of the examples I like to give, which also has a data point and a comparison, was talking about how in the state of Oklahoma, there are actually only two, or at that time, are only two Planned Parenthoods for the whole state. But yet, there were numerous clinics. There were more healthcare clinics for young women to go to and women to go to receive care, but they would have to drive for hours to even get to a Planned Parenthood. So it's showing that there is this issue out there where Planned Parenthood wants you to pretend, or in proponents of it, that women won't receive care without them, and that obviously isn't the case. So using that comparison of healthcare centers, using a data point to show the difference in numbers, there are two Planned Parenthoods versus X amount of healthcare centers for women in the state of Oklahoma. There are more healthcare centers than there are Planned Parenthoods. Another thing I say about Planned Parenthood as well, this kind of question comes up quite a bit, and that is, well, if we take taxpayer money away, then Planned Parenthood will cease to exist. And look, I know most of us want it to cease to exist. I don't think that's the most compelling argument in talking about it. One of the things I like to say when that type of question that comes up is to use a data point and to say, well, the reality is that 60% of the funding at Planned Parenthood is private. Planned Parenthood will continue to operate. What we are saying and what the American people agree with is that taxpayer money should not be going to this organization. So many people disagree that our tax money should fund this. So I'm just going to make a statement, start with that, say 60% of their funding comes from private donations. Planned Parenthood will likely continue to operate. Now, I know sometimes it's hard for us to say because we don't want Planned Parenthood to exist, but once again, don't lose the war because you're stuck on this one little battle here. I would encourage you to state what is true, which is that's where the majority of the funding comes from, because I want to win the battle in reference to funding. So that way you might even get the average person out there who may be afraid to take away taxpayer funding because they think, oh, that means women won't get health care, making it very clear that Planned Parenthood will continue to operate. And the last techniques, we did examples, comparisons, the use of data. The last thing I want to bring up as a technique with all of this is thinking of the use of a personal anecdote. So is there something that you can bring up in talking about this that is unique to you, something that you've experienced, something that you've gone through? I know when I'm training men on the issue of abortion, they already have the hard aspect of being a man and talking about it. It's easier as a woman to talk about the issue of abortion. But you know how powerful those stories are when women have had an abortion and they talk about regretting it. There's a reason why people go up there on stage and have such powerful speeches in talking about their own experience with it. So if you have a personal anecdote in relation to issues to this, it can be really, really powerful. I'll talk about something unrelated to religious issues, but is come in pretty handy for me in talking about issues. One is that I'm a small business owner, so if I'm ever talking about, let's say, healthcare, I'll mention that I'm a small business owner buying my own health insurance, and since the Affordable Care Act has passed, my premiums have quadrupled in price. Not because my health has changed, now I have gotten older, so of course as you get older, your healthcare costs go up a little bit, but that purely because of the healthcare system that penalizes, even though it wasn't intended to, penalizes those who buy in the individual market. I personally am struggling as a small business owner with my healthcare costs. So that can always be really powerful in talking about issues. So think about those personal anecdotes. So that means before you speak in a public speech or a media interview or anything related to a communication scenario, maybe even talking to a friend, talking to your neighbors, maybe it's talking at a meeting in your community, it's thinking about those talking points that are really going to be compelling. How can you connect with the audience who's there? So ask yourself, who are they? They people of faith, or do we have a mix? Or do you know offhand it's secular? But can you find those examples or those comparisons that are going to be compelling to anyone, regardless of where they stand on issues of faith? One of the things I like to say about faith in general that I think is important is often when I'm working with people who are Christians, for example, is I say, okay, don't use Bible passages if you're talking to a secular audience because that's not common ground. Now, I'm not saying you get rid of the point. There are a lot of universal truths that we can talk about without having to connect it to the Bible or without having to connect it to Jesus. So the idea of loving our neighbor, yes, that's in the Bible, but people who are even self-proclaimed atheists still think that we should be kind to our neighbor. So you can get to those universal truths without having to have the Bible as your foundation or your proof for it. So I like to think more generally about issues and getting to those universal truths that people can connect with. And this also means I often use, even instead of Christian, the term faith, because so many of our values, people of faith, whether someone is Muslim or Jewish or fill in the blank, a lot of people can unite on that issue, that universal truth. And so I like to use the catch-all phrase faith so that so people don't think I'm only talking about one religion over the other. So those are just some ways I want you to think about it. Develop those talking points, really target and relate it to the audience. And then you get to what really is the difficult part of talking about issues, and that is, what do you do if you are going to be asked really tough questions? So this could be in a media interview. This could also be in a Q&A session if you're giving some type of speech on this or public presentation. Or again, this could be you talking to a friend. When they ask you those really, really tough questions, how does one handle it? So there's a technique that I use that I coach my clients on. It's called blocking and bridging. What blocking and bridging is a way to realize when a question comes up, I often want to block spending all my time, let's say, on a faulty premise question. But I have to acknowledge it. I can't completely ignore a question that comes up. So I acknowledge it and I redirect to the talking points that I had developed. So this isn't dodging. I can always tell when somebody is dodging because they do something like this. They'll say, well, that's a great question, but what we really should be talking about is X. Well, that's always a dodge to me because if it was really a great question, you would have answered it. So the art of blocking and bridging is, again, to try to satisfy the question, give a brief response to it, but then very quickly find a pivot point, a bridge to get you to where you want to go. So in some issues that I've worked on, what we do is we not only work on talking points that we know pull well, but we spend a significant amount of time thinking through all the tough questions that could come up. What question could I be asked so that I can prepare a 10-second response that allows me to acknowledge, but very easily allows me to bridge to where I want to go? And this is a really important part of preparing messaging, especially for media interviews. So I know one issue that I worked on, I mentioned earlier, was the marriage issue. There are really two talking points that pulled well when that was first being discussed, but there are about 20 to 25 tough questions my clients and I prepared for. And we thought through, okay, it could be asked this way, this way, this way. How are you going to block and bridge that response? And that's where we spend a significant amount of time. And sadly, unfortunately, the tough question is something that's often forgotten as part of the preparation process that's really, really needed. So I'm going to demonstrate what blocking and bridging is. I'm going to use a personal example on this, a question I actually got in a media interview. And fortunately, I was prepared for it. I have two different examples that I want to give. One is that so I mentioned healthcare earlier, by my own healthcare. I did an interview on CNN when the House had passed repealing Obamacare, and then there was a Rose Garden ceremony that was done before the Senate actually took it up. And I have many thoughts on that. I don't think there should have been a celebration until it was passed in the Senate, which it didn't. It lost in the Senate. But I got this question out of the gate. First thing that I was asked in a CNN interview was this. They said, how can you support any type of bill that only white men support? And they rolled the image of the Rose Garden ceremony showing all the men who were standing behind the president, many of whom, if not they weren't all, but many of whom, most, were white. So I had to think about how to block and bridge that. How am I going to handle this? And so I had prepared in advance. So I'd been watching CNN that day, so I was aware of this question coming up, and they were playing this footage over and over again. And I will say it wasn't automatic. I don't think I would have automatically had assumed that that would have been a question that would have come up, especially not right out of the gate of the interview. So that brings up the point, you should try to listen to a show you may go on, watch a show you may go on. If you're talking to people in your community, what are they saying about issues? Try to figure out what those types of questions that could come up. It's playing devil's advocate. That devil's advocate side is a really important aspect to this. So when I was asked, how can you support anything that only white men support, and they had the footage playing there of all the men standing behind the president, this is what I had prepared and I started with. And I said, well, as a female small business owner whose health care, my health insurance has quadrupled in price, all I can say is I'm glad somebody is trying to help me with these high costs. And here's why they're so high. And then I went into my perspective. So what I did was show that I acknowledged the question, but very quickly blocked and bridged to where I wanted to go. So people are still going to disagree with my perspective, but what this technique does is, first of all, show that you heard the question, I'm not ignoring it, and hopefully diffuse the hostility. Hopefully people hear that answer and they think, okay, well, she's using a personal anecdote. This is something that's personal to her. And I played off the question about it being men to bringing up me as a woman, and here's why I support it. Another example of this would be in relation to healthcare once again. You probably remember this if you followed it closely about 3 or 4 years ago when all of this happened, was that Jimmy Kimmel, the comedian, he talked about his son who was born with 4 heart defects and thankfully survived it due to surgery, and I think is still doing really well today. And so he was talking about his son and saying that if Obamacare went away, that people who make less than him would not be able to have this type of surgery and their child wouldn't survive. And so that was the narrative that he came out with. And so I knew I was going to be asked this question in one of the interviews, and I had another personal anecdote ready to go on this one. And so when I was asked, I was able to start this way, which was to say, look, I'm so glad his son is doing well. My nephew had the exact same 4 heart defects, and it's so scary to see that little baby have to go through surgery. I'm just so glad we have surgeons and technology that can help these babies live. And the reality is, with the healthcare that's being proposed, it opens up more opportunities for children to get these types of surgeries, and here's how. And then I went into my talking point. So what it's doing again is not ignoring the question, it's acknowledging it and finding a pivot point. So what I did with those block and bridge phrases was to use a personal anecdote. And also in the last one, I use the technique of common ground, which is finding a way to show I have some agreement with Jimmy Kimmel. I want babies to have this surgery. I want them to live, and to also show not just sympathy, but empathy as somebody whose nephew went through the same surgery. And it's not the same as a parent having their child go through it, but as an aunt, it was a hard thing for me as well to see my nephew go through that. So it shows that empathetic side. So whenever you can do that, it really diffuses hostility. So what I encourage people to do when they're preparing is thinking through what is the best way I can either show common ground or show empathy or sympathy. Can I acknowledge this in a really effective way so I can get that average person who may hear that question, a hostile question, and may think, oh, you're guilty of something? Can you respond in an artful way to get people to say, oh, that person sounds reasonable? And it allows you to bridge very seamlessly to what it is that you want to talk about. want to give you, within the blocking and bridging, 2 pitfalls you want to avoid. And honestly, if you take anything away from this training, I would recommend that this is something that you focus in on, because it's so important and it's so often used against people of faith as well. This first one is really, really important, and that is, do not repeat negative accusations about yourself. Do not repeat negative accusations. So it is a very common thing to be accused of something, or for your position to be accused of something. A very common one is that we are discriminating. So you are discriminating. That type of question comes up. Our natural response is to say, I'm not discriminating. That's what we like to go to. I understand why we do it. It's one of the ways that we communicate just with each other, is we often, whatever the word choice is that's housed within the question that's thrown at us, we often will use that same wording as part of our response. So it's just a very natural thing that we do. But here's why it's dangerous when we are being attacked often and we want to sound warm, offensive, and not defensive. The reason is that you don't want to use this is, first of all, whenever you say what you're not, people don't think that you're not guilty of it. It doesn't settle the question. So for example, think about it. If somebody told you this, I'm not a liar, does that make you feel better? Do you all of a sudden think to yourself, whew, I'm so glad they told me that they're not a liar, because I was worried they are, but now they settled that question? Of course not. When somebody tells you they're not a liar, they're not a cheater, fill in the blank of whatever they're not, it actually makes you a little bit more wary of them and wonder, what are they hiding? Why do they feel like they need to say this to me? So I find that it's counterproductive to say what you're not. But there also is a different reason, or an additional reason why you shouldn't do this. Whatever you say you aren't, if you are ever interviewed on something, it's likely the quote they take for a print piece, it's likely the soundbite they take if they do a man on the street style video with you. Whatever you say, you're not. So I have seen more often than not, or more times than I would like to admit, that a religious organization is interviewed about a certain topic and they're asked this question. Well, isn't that a bigoted perspective? And the way the response comes out is, no, we're not bigots. And then they give the reason why they're not a bigot. And the only thing that the New York Times is going to take and put in the final product is that quote, we're not bigots. Is that the one quote that you want in a New York Times piece? It's not. It's not even getting to your message. It's not getting to the point that you want to get across. So it's very important to not do that. I'm going to give you some famous I'm nots, by the way, so just show how common this is. I'm not a liar is a famous I'm not. I'm not a crook. I don't beat my wife. Did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Melania Trump has said before that her husband is not Hitler. Even when there was the tragic Parkland shooting, the one security, I think it was the sheriff that didn't go in to help the kids, he actually said in an interview, I'm not a coward, and that became the headline of newspapers. So whatever you say you're not easily becomes a tweet, easily becomes a headline, easily becomes a quote, and it's often bringing up a narrative you hadn't even planned on talking about. So what do we do in these scenarios when this comes up? So the technique itself is this, which is, you want to show you disagree with the premise of the question without using the words of the question. So you're not going to use the accusation. So I'll give you some tips for that, some phrases you can use. And then always you want to bridge to what you are. So let me give you the four phrases that I give to clients. You may develop your own that could be really helpful, but these are phrases that show that you disagree with the premise of the question without you getting into any trouble. So if you're accused of something, you can start your answer by saying this: not at all. And then here's what I am. Or here's another option: that's not the case. And then here's what you are. Or that's not accurate. And then you go into what you are. Or if it's a really offensive accusation, you can just say absolutely not or no, and then you go into here's what I am. So if you are accused of, let's say, well, aren't you just discriminating? I wouldn't want you to say the word discriminate, and say not at all. All people should be treated with dignity and respect. And we see that this plays out in, and then I go into my response, my talking point that I develop. So I'm going to try to avoid, or you should avoid, saying the word or saying the phrase, I'm not discriminating. So let me give you those 4 phrases again. Not at all. That's not the case. That's not accurate. And absolutely not. You can, of course, develop your own, something that works with your own voice and your own voice, and something that feels authentic and natural to you. So that's one pitfall to avoid. Do not say what you're not. The second pitfall I want you to avoid is when you don't meet emotion with emotion. I want you to meet emotion with emotion. So what does that mean? Well, often the toughest questions that you could get, in addition to those accusatory style questions that we just discussed, is to have a question that has a victim within it, whether hypothetical or real. So whatever your perspective is, there's a question that comes up, and the perspective of that question is that you are harming someone, whether that person is real or hypothetical, and that single example is the question to try to discredit the rest of your perspective. So what we often do when we get this type of question is, even if we get to the victim, the female, male, whoever it happens to be, whether hypothetical or real, we like to give our argument first, and then we like to come around to what does it mean for that person. I would encourage you, and this is what you should do, is whenever there's a victim, to start with acknowledging the victim. Again, whether hypothetical or real, I'm going to say something about that individual and then bridge to my argument. If you talk about that victim after your argument, first of all, you may be cut off. People may not even allow you to continue to speak to get to that point, but often you just sound disconnected. You're making a policy argument, and here is a question about people. So you have to start with that person angle. So let's say it is a topic about abortion, and the question comes up about a woman, women, back alley abortions, women who've died. That's the question, or that style of question that comes up. I would start by talking about women, say, look, it's tragic, and these women are victims. That's the reality. But it's not just because of bad medical practice that we often see, but it's also because women are told that this is their only option, and that's not true. And then I would go into whatever I want. So show compassion, show that emotion to that question, and that can be really, really helpful. I just want to see where we are in time. Give me a second. So, good on time. I want to get into a few other areas just related to how we deliver in general. And remember, we're going to be taking some questions after this. I want you to be thinking of different things that you can ask. I want that to be a really vibrant section, and maybe even you can give me some specific examples of issues that you're working on that I can help you think through it. So I want to talk about just overall delivery with all of this. One thing that can be hard in these types of topics is to just keep one's composure. You want to keep your composure. Again, you don't want to come across as angry. You want to come across as somebody who's seeming compassionate and be on the offensive versus seeming defensive. So part of that is just going to be voice control. So making sure that your voice doesn't sound angry, but keeping it more in just a calm manner. Now, I do think it's important for people to project their voice. So you do want to have good volume. You want to have good energy. By the way, if you're ever doing a media interview, what I recommend in a media interview is the volume that you would use if you're speaking to, let's say, 10 to 15 people with no microphone. That volume that you would use is a volume that you need to use as well as you're speaking on camera. It's not because you're going to be blasting anybody's ear out. There are microphones where an audio operator is going to adjust. For example, I have a boom mic in front of me or up top, and there's somebody who is adjusting the audio based on the volume that people use. But I find when people project their voice, there's a lot more vocal energy. And what I mean by vocal energy is more inflection, more intonation. There's just, it sounds more present. So the volume that I'm using right now is obviously what I do in media interviews. I'm talking to you right now using it. It's not what I would use if it was just one-on-one with someone. I'd use a quieter voice, but this just overall helps me appear or sound more engaging. And this is the other thing you will find as well, which is a really interesting thing, something that I learned just as I coach people more and more throughout the years. Whatever you do with your voice, your visuals tend to follow. Whatever you do with your voice, your visuals tend to follow. So vocals and visuals are very much tied together. So if I'm working with someone who visually just looks really low energy, I'll say low energy Jeb. We don't want any low energy Jebs out there. The first thing I have them do is just speak louder. Because when they project their voice, typically there's more brightness in their face as a whole, which obviously helps one out quite a bit. So voice, having that commanding voice is really, really important. And by the way, if you are someone who struggles with nerves when you're speaking in front of people, so public speeches, media interviews, fill in the blank of whatever it is, I totally understand. It's the greatest fear that people have is speaking in front of others, even greater than the fear of sharks and heights and yes, even death, is if you have that shaky voice because you're a little bit nervous, volume can really help push through that shakiness. So that's one tip to help you. One other thing I want to say, it's kind of related to voice that may be of help to you if you get nervous in front of a crowd. Do you get dry mouth? So I get this question a lot, that one gets dry mouth. What do I do? Of course, you can have water next to you. I have water to the side that I can grab. By the way, I know people like to use this example of Marco Rubio when he drank water. It's fine to drink water. The issue that he ran into is he did it so quickly. So he thought it was almost like if I do it quickly, it won't be as bad, it won't be as noticeable. It just made it worse. So I'm going to show you, because I actually do need to get a drink of water, how you should get a drink of water if you are on. You just say, let me get a drink. I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to open it up. People, accept the fact that I'm speaking for a while, I might need water, there's not a problem with it. So if you need a drink, you just take a drink. But what if you have a very short interview, there's not a time to actually get a drink? What if you're on stage, you forgot to bring water up? What do you actually do? So I have a little tip that may give you a little bit of relief if you have dry mouth, and that is if you move your tongue behind the bottom row of teeth. So behind your teeth, and move your tongue back and forth, it actually helps produce a little bit of saliva, which can help you if you have a dry mouth. So I'm sure everybody, and whenever I say this, people try it. So go ahead and try it, and you can do it without anybody seeing. So here's me doing it without anybody knowing. And that can help you out. So that's just a little tip for you, something that you can do if you're being asked questions. While you're being asked a question, you can do that. The other thing that I want to talk about is just facial expressions, body language in general. This would be helpful for both a media interview and for a public speaking context. So it can be used for both. You want to have, just like you want to have a offensive sounding voice, not defensive. You don't want to lose your composure. You always want to seem in control. You want your facial expressions to match that as well. They should be warm. They should be engaging. And so I want to go through the different techniques that you can use. So I'm going to start actually with posture, how you sit in a chair. We're going to start kind of from feet up. So if you ever did a man on the street style video where you're standing, please do not shift weight back and forth. So shifting weight back and forth would be moving you in and out of the frame if you're being interviewed. So you don't want to do that. And if you're seated, you don't want to move waist down. So I am not in a swivel chair, which is good, although I've pretty much have mastered the art of not swiveling in a chair because it's distracting. But if I was swiveling back and forth, it would look like I'm nervous or I'm fidgety, and that is not the perception that you want to, or you want people to have of you. So you have to sit still. So waist down, you don't move. Stay planted. When we talk about posture and sitting in a chair, you do have to be very careful about how you sit in a chair. So poor posture, I'm going to show you poor posture. This is poor posture, just leaning back, I'm just kind of phoning it in, super relaxed. This is not the posture that you want for an interview. So why is that? Why is this, especially with my arms up, why is this poor posture? Well, it looks like you're too relaxed, so that's one reason. But the other reason is that the camera is two-dimensional, not three-dimensional. And what I mean by that is that you don't see depth of field through the lens of the camera. So just like we go to see a 3D movie to try to have the movie characters pop on screen, the same thing happens through TV, through the lens of the camera, where everything's flattened because you don't have depth of field. So even leaning back into a chair like this, it looks like I'm leaning back even further than what I am. Or if there was a flag directly behind me, if there was a tree directly behind me, it would look like it was growing out of my head. So you don't want to do that. So the posture you actually have, I'm looking in the monitor right now, as well, is to actually sit up tall. I like to push myself a little bit towards the edge of the chair, and sitting up tall will help you look like you're distancing yourself from the background and look more present in the conversation. So it's like a core workout. It will work out your core. And as I like to tell people, if you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong. This is comfortable. It's much more comfortable when I sit like this. By the way, my voice even changes a little bit. I have to fight for it not to when I'm sitting in a relaxed position. You actually have to sit up tall, project your voice. It will help you project your voice, and this will help you look more present in the conversation. So that's posture. Now let's move to facial expression. So often when we're talking about serious issues, this is something that happens with our facial expressions. We furrow. We pull our brow right here. By the way, men do this more than women, so women furrow less than men do, but this looks closed off and very stern. You don't want that. What everybody needs is a neutral brow, just a relaxed brow, and if you want to show emphasis, you lift, or I can move my head at the same time to show some emphasis, but I don't want to furrow my brow. So sometimes you'll work with somebody who does media training like I do, and that trainer will tell you what you do is you just smile through an interview. So you just need to be like this, and you need to smile, and everything's fine, and it's super awkward, especially when you're talking about really, really hard topics like abortion. Most people struggle to smile when they speak, so when they've been told they need to smile to be likable, what ends up happening is they give an answer, and when they finish, they go to, I'm smiling, this is what I'm using, and it looks really, really awkward, obviously. What I just did looks really awkward. What I have found in working with people over the years, that whether or not somebody looks and sounds engaging, first of all, starts with their voice. Are they projecting their voice, and do they sound passionate? The other part is, does their brow look relaxed, and are their eyes open? It's more about an openness and a brightness in a face. So it's really more about this than it ever is about a smile, which is fascinating. And one of the things that will help you, because people say, well, how do I smile about something like abortion? And I totally understand. I can show concern and lift my brow for emphasis. I'll move my head at the same time. I'll have some of that energy. And that is how I can show passion and engagement without it looking stern. So much about the life that we need to bring to the camera is going to be in our facial expressions, without movement, waist down. So I'm not going to be moving around, swiveling in a chair. What I'm trying to do is brighten my face right here. You start with the good posture, and then you deliver. You do need to maintain eye contact. That's whether you are speaking to a crowd or whether that is you speaking directly into a camera. So I'm speaking directly into a camera. I'm looking here the whole time. And by the way, with what we're all doing on our computers these days, what we do in virtual meetings, interviews that are going to be all remote, a lot of it is about having good eye contact with the camera. So if I'm doing a meeting with someone and they're looking all over the screen, it just looks like they're not engaged and they're not present. So maintaining that good eye contact is a really, really important part. And let me just give you a little bit of a tip on those virtual meetings that you may do. I'm going to give you 4 tips to really help you with a setup so that you are set up for success. And I know sometimes when we think about these setups, we think, well, it's just superficial. The message is the only thing that matters. Even if it seems superficial, it does matter. Think about it. If you see somebody who has a really awkward setup, it's shooting up at their nose, it's hard to take them as credible when everything is off about the camera position itself. So I'm going to give you 4 tips to help with you using your computer from home for a meeting or even for a media interview, because these days, even national cable interviews, most people are doing them from their home. So you need to have that good setup for so many different communication scenarios these days. One is that you need your camera to be eye level. So most of us are doing Skype through our computer. Some may do it through an app on a phone or an iPad, but usually it's a laptop computer that we're using. You need the computer to be lifted up so that the camera is eye level, meaning that the camera should be the same level as my eyes. So that means you need to, more than likely, prop up your computer on books. At my house, I actually use board games because I have 2 board games that are like perfect height for my table to lift up my computer. So you want to have that line of sight that works really well. And here, by the way, here's a little tip if you're using your computer. I've just kind of found this out in the past 6 months as I'm coaching more and more people to do interviews from their computers, is if you look at your web camera on your laptop, it actually looks like you're looking a little too high. So every computer is different, so you need to try it out. But looking up at the camera, it just looks like it's a little too high. What I found, if you look just about an inch below, the eye contact looks spot on. So here's the nice thing about that. Since you do need to maintain eye contact and you shouldn't be looking around the screen, that means you can take a Post-it note, put it about an inch below the webcam, and put a bullseye there or a sticker on your computer that you need to focus on. People, this is what I've learned with people, is it's much easier to keep your focus and maintain your eye contact if you have something that you can focus on. So shut everything down on your computer that could pop up and be a distraction, and have that one sticker, that one point that you can look at. So that's what you do about eye contact. I want to talk about background. Make sure you have a nice background, that there's nothing in it that's distracting. Of course, you can use a bookcase. I find that, though, if you put yourself directly in front of a wall, it looks kind of imposing. We talked about the lack of depth of field. I like it when people move themselves away from a wall. It can even be nice to have a living room behind you, even a kitchen behind you, but having that depth of field will soften the image in the background and make you pop more. So that may mean you need to get away from your stationary desk. What I do is I have a TV tray that I move around and can move in the middle of my living room. And I have a really nice brick wall, exposed brick wall that works in the background. If I was at my desk, I would have a wall directly behind me. So that TV tray allows me to move around. I prop up my computer on books, and that's where I do it. I want to get to lighting. Lighting is really key. Please never put a window directly behind you. So if the window is here and shining light towards the back of my head, you are not going to have good lighting on your face at all. If you're going to use natural light, it must shine towards your face. Must shine towards your face. Or what I would recommend, I have one, get the ring light, R-I-N-G, the ring light. You can get it on Amazon. I bought one for $40 and it works great. No matter what time of day, I turn it on. It looks good. It actually looks in many cases better than what natural light would be. So that's something that can be really helpful. So lighting is key. The last thing I want to mention is audio. You do need to have good audio when you're doing this. Again, even for your meetings, your virtual meetings that you have. So figure out what is a good microphone to use. Some computers, if you're in a quiet room and you're close enough to your computer, maybe the computer mic is okay. But for an interview, what I do is I actually use wireless headphones. So I use AirPods to put in my ear so I can hear the question. If you do an interview, most producers are going to ask you to do that so there's no feedback loop. And then I bought on Amazon what's called a lavalier mic, a little pin-on mic that I put directly on me that can plug into the computer. So my sound is so much better with that. Of course, you can do the plug-in headphones that have the microphone attached. That's going to give good sound, but just make sure that you're not echoey and that you have the best sound as possible. I want to see where we are on time. We are going to be doing some questions soon. So I have about a few minutes to finish up, a few things that I want to talk to you about just kind of in closing and preparing for all of this. Just a few tips on media interviews in general and on a public speech. So first of all, if you do a radio interview, if you've never done any interviews before, I think a radio interview is a really, really great place to start. You don't have to worry about how you look at all. Just know for radio that segments are typically around 7 minutes long, roughly around 7 minutes long, and you should not speak for too long. So you don't speak for 7 minutes straight. It's not a monologue. This is supposed to be a dialogue, a back and forth with you and the host of the show. I recommend that answers should be about 45 seconds each. This does mean you have to take the bulk of what you know and break it into individual answers for an interview. So if you're used to giving speeches and you now need to give media interviews, this is going to be an aspect to it that you need to work on, which is segment your content. And I would just come to the table with 2 or 3 things for a live interview that you really want to get to. So that's something for live radio. Do know, usually you're calling in. So if you're calling in on a cell phone, please make sure that you have a really good cell signal. So don't do an interview from a car where you could be driving in and out of signal. Let's move to live TV. If you did live TV, the most common form is going to be like a cable news show. Those segments are typically under 5 minutes. Your answer should be roughly around 30 seconds. So roughly for radio, 45 seconds. For live interviews. For TV, roughly 30 seconds. So those are just things to keep in mind for trying to segment your answers and work it in. The last thing I want to talk about is just public speech. How would you prepare for that? What does that look like? I think the easiest part of a speech is just knowing kind of the body of it. So it would be similar to developing talking points for a media interview. Is here are the 3 things I want to cover in a speech. Here are the 3 things I want to cover. You can just expand on those in a speech. You have more time. Always ask how long you have before you go on, and never exceed your time. People will not be upset if you go shorter. So don't exceed your time. And by the way, in those points in a speech, that's where you can bring in your examples or a comparison or a data point. That's all in the body of the speech. But one of the things that I spend a decent amount of time on with my clients is how you open a speech. How do you really capture people? What is it that is going to perk people's ears up and make them want to listen to you? And I call it the hook. How do you hook people in from the beginning? Or another way to think about, how can I talk about something they care about before I'm talking about what I want to say? So can I kind of defer to them before I defer to myself for the time that I have? So here's one example. I was working with a client that is a cancer research foundation, and we had a press conference that was developing their talking points and their messaging for. And we knew that we really wanted to hook people in as we started. And so we started with a data point about how many people die each year from cancer. So we gave the data point up front, staggering number, just to set the tone as to why their research is so important. But here's what we did. At the end of the speech, we came back to it, and the spokesperson talked about how many people had died from cancer since the press conference started. And it just really had this emotional end to it and put into perspective how many people are dying on a regular basis and why this research is so important. So is there a news story you can bring up at the beginning? Is there a data point? And can you come back around and book it? I call it bookending it at the end. So you start with an idea and then you close out with that idea at the end is a really good technique. But sometimes what you want to do is just relate to the audience that's there. Maybe that is a news story that really relates to the age of the crowd, the political ideology of the crowd. Is there a way I can connect to them before I even get to the information I want to share? So that introduction is a really, really important part. So we're going to go to questions now. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, and I'm glad we have someone facilitating this. By the way, you have a very good TV tie color. I like the purple.
Thank you, Beverly. I actually chose this specifically this morning.
I appreciate that.
Will Beverly approve of this outfit? So you've made my day.
And nice socks as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I've gotten a couple of compliments on them, actually. I'm glad I chose them now. So if our audience is interested, they're happy to give recommendations. So thank you so much for your excellent presentation to start with. We've been getting tons and tons of questions here, so I apologize if we don't get to all of them, but I want to try and get through as many.
I'm going to
as
relax
I can.
now because I've done my core workout.
Yes.
Through the posture. So
Exactly. Now we can kind of lean back, so relaxed setting. Perfect. Let me see which ones. Perfect. So here's a good opening question to start with from Matthew. And I do encourage our audience to continue putting in questions as we go along. I'll try and get through as many as possible. This is very helpful. Thank you, Beverly. Seems like much of what you're sharing will be helpful dealing with hostile media or helpful generally. Could you speak or give some tips to maximizing effectiveness with friendly press interviews?
So part of that, with friendly, it's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about the hostile questions as much. But as I coach people on these issues, what you want to do is developing messaging that people can repeat. Mm-hmm. So whatever is repeated is going to work for a friendly audience or for a hostile audience. So there shouldn't necessarily be different messages. Now, the way I bring it to life may change for an audience that's in front of me. But generally, once I'm working with clients and we know what works, we just repeat those because I want a friendly audience to repeat those as well.
Yeah.
So here are the 2 points that work generally for a wide audience. I'm going to bring those to you, talk about them, hopefully that it's going to be recycled by the people who are listening to me. So even with a friendly audience, often a lot of times what I'm doing with my training is getting a friendly audience to not speak in ways that's going to turn people off. So it's trying to get them on board with, here's the best way to talk about it.
Perfect. And does your rapport with if you're being interviewed, does that change at all, like in terms of the friendliness, the back and forth, or are you always friendly even to a really hostile interviewer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Your personality really should be the same for
Yeah.
both. I'm actually working with a client right now who has a lawsuit that's kind of tricky, and they're talking to hostile media about it. It is so important for composure or having good composure in dealing with that hostile reporter, the potentially hostile reporter. And one thing I always say is, even if that reporter mischaracterizes aspects of your perspective or even who you are, I have a feeling if you talk to them and had a good rapport with that reporter over the phone, they're at least going to be somewhat more favorable to you. I find that legitimate reporters, even if they disagree with you, they respect people who are willing to speak. So I know a lot of people who know that the media is not on our side, just want to avoid it altogether. If you are not prepared, please avoid it. Definitely avoid it. The media are not your friends, but they're going to write a story regardless. So if you are prepared or you're working with a spokesman who is prepared, I would much rather you have the opportunity to at least share your perspective on it, because if they've talked to you, they will include it.
Yeah.
And as I say, they can't make you say something that you don't want to say.
Sure.
They can't make you do it. So I would rather your words get in, because I think one of the worst things that can happen is to have a quote that says, we reached out to so-and-so and they said no comment. I always think that looks bad. It looks like you're evading and you're afraid to speak.
Excellent, thank you. That makes a lot of sense, and it's missing out on that great opportunity to get your voice across, even if it's the paragraph before and the paragraph after is not your friend. A good question here from Jason. What do you do if you get caught on camera flat-footed and you really don't have an answer to the question? Let's say the interviewer throws some abstract statistic at you or goes off of message from what you agreed you would talk about. How do you handle that?
So that's blocking and bridging. So what we talked about earlier. It is okay to say that you don't know something if it's outside of the scope. Now, if I was going on to talk about, let's say, research, so there was something research related, and I'm asked a question specific to that research, and I don't have an answer, that's bad. Okay? You should know it. That should not happen. But if I'm asked a question outside of this, there's breaking news or something along those lines, it is okay to say, I don't have those specifics or I don't have that data in front of me, but here's what I can tell you as a whole. So what you want to do in those situations is, if you don't know something, try to go back to something that you know. And I'll give you an example of that. I was doing an interview, it was probably close to a year ago now, where I can't remember the topic I was supposed to speak on. But right before the segment, the president had announced a new secretary for the VA. He nominated a new secretary. I was not familiar with who this person is. So the question I get was, we just have this new secretary who's been nominated. Beverly, what do you think of him? I don't know who it is. And so I actually said in that moment, well, I don't know enough about him to give a good answer on that, but here's what I can say about the VA department as a whole and problems that have been there. And so I talked about what I could say. Now, if that nomination had come out the day before and I wasn't able to comment on it, that would look bad. But considering it was breaking news, there was more allowance and understanding. So it's okay to say you don't know if it's outside the scope, and always try to go back to what you do know.
So thank you. I think that's really helpful to make sure that you can still maintain that credibility, but without accidentally endorsing a candidate you don't want to endorse, or who knows what else if you try and pretend like you know it all, right? So I have a question here, and this is a little different, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. So Kathleen asks, how differently would one speak with close family members who disagree with you as to the media? So this is still that kind of communication, but in that in-person communication, how do you recommend, you're at the dinner table, somebody very much disagrees with you, how do you put your point across?
So it's hard, I'm not going to lie, and this is where we are in very polarizing times, so Thanksgiving can be more polarizing than ever. We always see those articles come out every November with how to talk to your family and friends. rule number one, in my opinion, is this a debate one should have? So are people coming in good faith to talk about this issue, or is this just going to be people dug in on both sides? It's not beneficial to talk. So I do have certain friends where we agree to not talk about politics because it's where we already know what we think and it's not beneficial. So first of all, is this a beneficial conversation to have where people can do it calmly? I first of all think that's fine because like I said, I have some family members and friends where I will just say, look, I don't think it's wise for us to discuss politics. And for the sake of our relationship, I don't think that we should. So I have no problem making that determination. The second thing I would do though is listen to people. So in this scenario, you can listen more. So in a media interview, you're being asked questions, so you're not listening. In a public speech, you're the one speaking, you're not listening. But in one-on-one conversations with people, start by asking questions. Listen to what they care about. If people feel like they're heard, they're typically more willing to then hear what you have to say. And as I'm asking questions of someone, I get to learn what they really care about. Is there an issue within this where I can find common ground? So I can start with that common ground before I may even show where we have some disagreement. So that's just a really important part of that is the listening aspect in one-on-one conversation or in small group conversation.
I think that's a really good point. And often one can find agreement in the why, right? Let's say it's, everyone agrees that we need to reduce unemployment. Everyone agrees that we want to make people richer. The debate is, about how we get to that point,
Exactly.
right? So finding that common ground means that you can at least work off some sort of foundation on which you can then maybe disagree on the procedures. And I find that the conversations are a little bit more cordial when you're talking about the how to do something,
Right.
but you're agreeing on the why. So I think that's a very, very good point. I have a question here. So Sharon says, I have trouble thinking clearly when speaking to a hostile group. How can I stay calm and think well? Do you have any tactics for kind of how you stay calm in those stressful situations?
So part of this is the preparation, and I'll give an example of this. I was asking one Fox News producer what they're looking for most in guests, and he said somebody to be nimble. And that word nimble has stuck with me, and here's the reason why. So much about being on the spot and being able to handle questions that are hostile in nature, or let's say it's a little bit different than what you expected, is the ability to adjust live. Mm-hmm. You need that skill set to be able to hear a question and go to something you do know and not get thrown off by the specifics of it, but realize I can go to a broad answer related to it. So part of the technique and doing this well, whether it's taking questions in a speech or in a media interview or just with people, is to practice the skill of what's called murder boarding. So this happens a lot in DC and with organizations where even if a camera isn't involved, you have a group of people who sit down and throw the most hostile questions out at the person who has to answer these later on, let's say in a hearing or something like that. This is getting used to all the questions that could be asked, but also the skill set of remaining calm. So if you do not practice this, getting used to somebody asking you questions and you calmly responding, is going to be very hard to do that live. So this is where you can team up with a friend. Have a friend, maybe you do this with each other, you play devil's advocate. Can you calmly respond to those? Because the more you're used to hearing hostility and you're used to the technique of going and blocking and bridging to what you want to get to, it's going to be a much easier skill set. It's part of the reasons why it's hard if you're not used to the technique. That alone is going to make one really nervous. So it's preparation, it's practice. It's why I have a company.
This sounds like a very good reason to attend the Leadership Institute's on-camera television workshop to me.
Always good to plug.
Yes.
You just got a bonus at the end of the year right there.
Exactly. So I have another question here, and this one's from Valerie, who says, do you have any suggestions for talking to people of faith who espouse a liberal point of view?
Sure. This would be the common ground angle. And there are plenty of people in that camp who, let's say whether it's helping the poor, so welfare, how welfare is used, completely understand where that's coming from. You get to the heart of it first. And then you get to the why. So if I was talking to someone, say, who agreed with me on the Bible, I would start by saying, you and I agree that Jesus said we need to help our neighbor, love our neighbor, and we need to help the poor. That is a clear command, no ifs, ands about it, ifs or ands about it. That's something we need to do. I think where we disagree is how do we do it? Like, did Jesus ask the government to do it, or did Jesus go out there on his own? Now, and then I would say, Prisma, here's where I agree with you. I think as Christians we don't do that enough.
Yeah.
I agree. There's a problem. We've abdicated the role that I think we should have. But my reading of how Jesus told us to do it is that we need to be out there helping our neighbors.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. We have a question here, and this one at LI we get asked a lot, and I think it's very important, which is, do you have any suggestions for engagement on Facebook or on social media? As you know, we only have to look on any major candidates' Twitter or Facebook these days to see how quickly things descend into personal attacks. Sherry here asks, do you have any suggestions for when you make a comment on Facebook and are attacked or misinterpreted by people who disagree with you?
So it depends is going to be my non-committal answer to this. So first of all, social media is a cesspool. I'm just going to throw that out there, Twitter especially. But I think it's important to engage. So if first of all, people are saying, should I be on Twitter? If you want to get the eyes of reporters, you should be on Twitter. So the stats are this, which is only 5% of the country is on Twitter, but all reporters are. Yeah. So if you want reporters to see what you're writing, if you want to build a relationship with them, Twitter can be important. And it's how a lot of news is created these days. By the way, some of the best ways for me to prepare my clients for tough interviews is to see what is on Twitter. So I follow people I disagree with. I read people I disagree with. I encourage people to do that. But as far as responding to hostility, this would go back to similar to what I said about dealing with family and friends. Is it worth having a discussion? Is this person wanting to have a fair debate or not? If not, I just often say don't feed the trolls. Let it lie. If it's really offensive, you can delete their comment if you want. Where I do engage is if it is somebody who wants to have a productive conversation, or if it's somebody disparaging me and is somebody that's known. Yeah. And then at that point, I want to make sure that I set the record straight. So I can state my case, but always kindly, never getting frustrated. I will do this even in my response on social media. I'll start by saying that's not accurate, which is one of the tips I gave if you're accused of something, and then setting the record straight for what is true. And this is one tip that I do is asking the person through the social media post if they're willing to take this offline and have a discussion.
Yes.
Like if it keeps going back and forth, say, would you be willing to have this conversation via email or over the phone? I'd be happy to. Yeah, and usually they say no.
I'm sure. And I imagine, especially if you're a candidate for office, maybe you don't have time to do this if it's a major campaign, but if you're on a smaller campaign, taking the time to just call that person up and just say, hey, I want to hear your thoughts on this. And it's funny how when you have a face or a voice on the phone, how much more polite people get.
Well, I've thought about writing an article with the title called How Anonymity Killed Civility. Yeah. Because I think that's what social media has done. It's just killed that civil aspect. So for somebody who is running for office, if this is a constituent or a potential constituent, ask them if they're willing to come into your office and talk to you. Yeah. So I'd be happy to talk to you. I want to hear your concerns. Are you willing to do that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Often when you see some of the most unpleasant people on social media, they don't have a profile picture. They don't always have a name that they're willing to attach with the things that they're saying. So it's funny, as you say, once you get rid of that anonymity and they put a face to the person, which is why that messaging on TV is so important as well.
And I could add one more point to this. It is true that you will get a lot more followers if you're provocative. Yeah. But, as I like to say, is that the long-term brand that you want? Are you actually going to win people over by throwing bombs on people on Twitter? You could, yes, get a ton of followers. You could be popular on Twitter, but are you effective? So I'm always trying to get people into the camp of, can you win people over who may not on the surface think that they agree with you? Yes. Can you get somebody? So that's always a perspective I'm coming from. So I'll have somebody, let's say, they'll say, well, Ann Coulter's like that on TV. And I'll say, Ann Coulter has built a massive business for herself off of being provocative. But is she changing anyone's minds? I would argue that there are people who agree with her and that's the camp that she's in. I'm not knocking her strategy or her brand. It's just you have to ask yourself what you're trying to accomplish. Are you actually trying to change minds, or are you trying to make a name for yourself among people who agree?
Yes, I think that's a good point. Is that you have to know your personal brand and what it is, and stick to that. I think that makes a lot of sense. We have a question here, and you may have covered it earlier, Beverly, but I'll give you the chance to expand on it if you'd like, which is about tips on what to wear when being interviewed.
Purple.
Purple, yes.
Now, there is one thing about your tie that could potentially present a problem. Do you know what that
texture.
is? The texture.
Yeah.
So small patterns can present a problem. So there's lots I could say about that. Let me just give a few general rules, especially during this era where all of us are doing things from home. Just because you're home doesn't mean that you wear pajamas, right? Think about whoever you're speaking to, whether that's an immediate interview or a meeting. What is your boss wearing, or what is the host wearing? And do not dress down or dress below what they are wearing. You should dress in an appropriate manner for that. So just think about in terms of what would be expected. Like today, for example, I actually didn't know the complete setup that we were doing. I didn't know if it was just going to be one single camera or if it was going to be like this. I probably, if I knew it was going to be one single camera, I probably would have worn jeans, knowing that just waist up. But I was like, I don't know. It could be a 3-camera shoot, which it is. So I didn't wear jeans because you don't know, so you dress for it. So think about the occasion. For women, this is a mistake I did make today, is I wore black. I did not ask what the background color is. So my black dress is blending into the background. It would have been better if I wore a color. So that's a question I should have asked. For women, though, the basics for clothing and what you can wear, it can be a dress, it can be a blazer, whatever you want, but women can use color more to their advantage, so bright colors typically work best. It's not that you can't ever wear black. If you have dark hair for a female, I actually wouldn't wear a black dress because it usually can blend in. Since I have lighter hair, my hair color doesn't blend in with my dress. I personally prefer sleeves. Your arms become more prominent on the camera. I like that. For men, what I would say is I really like a gray or a blue suit more than a black suit on camera. Black is really hard to light. You can do the white crisp shirt with the blue or the gray, and white looks better with those colors than with a deep black, because white reflects light, black absorbs light, and it's a little bit, it's kind of hard to light it and it'll look good against your skin tone. And I like bright ties. Bright colors, but try to avoid patterns. So whether for women or men, small patterns can create a problem called the Murray effect, which is a French term, the Murray effect. And you see it a lot with ties, and it looks like the pattern is moving around. So that's if there's a small stripe or a small dot, that can present an issue.
I see. And the problem is then people are looking at that and not listening to what you're saying.
Correct.
No, I think that's a very, very good point.
Yeah, people can Google Murray effect, which is Moiree, and you can see some images of what it looks like.
If you look at most politicians when they go on TV, they definitely have very much those kind of block colours, don't they?
Yeah.
Trump is the red tie or the defined stripes on the tie. So that is very important. So I have a few more questions here. So let's have a look here. So this question, it's a good one. How do you know which camera to look at? Is there a monitor? I assume this is related to when you're on television. So is there a monitor that you can see yourself on? More importantly, what if you have a resting B face?
Yes.
I have a natural downturn frown, so smiling all the time can sometimes look crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not true to our anonymous attendee. I'm sure you have a lovely face. But yeah, what do you do in those circumstances?
So here's a general rule of eye contact, and that is always look at the person asking you the question. But if the person who you're speaking to is not in the room with you, the camera becomes the direction you look. So in other words, the camera becomes proxy for anyone you're not speaking to. So I've looked in 2 different directions today. When I did my discussion to the audience is not in the room with me, the camera is the direction that I look. That's where I look the whole time. When you're here talking to me, I look at you because people at home are tuning in on a conversation that we are having. Now, with your questions, if we tossed to people at home asking those questions, I would have looked in the camera as I listened to them and would have responded that way. But you're the one acting as proxy for them, so I look here. So that's the general rule of where do you look. Is the person in the room? If they are, you look at them. If they're not, you look at the camera. Now, I knew that that was the camera that I should look into for my read because I understand how cameras are positioned. What I would encourage everybody to ask is, which camera should I look into? They usually have numbers. They will tell you which number camera to look into. Please do not guess. So if I thought I look at this camera to do my read, which of course it'd be weird if I did that, it's going to be super awkward, right? I had a client who once thought the camera that she should look into for audience questions on C-SPAN was in the ceiling. So they would cut to her and she would look up. Camera will never be in the ceiling. Ask the crew. That's an important part. And where's the second? Oh, the RBF.
Yes.
So, yeah, most of us struggle knowing what to do with our face when we're not speaking. It's much easier to know what to do with your face when you are speaking. So I, just like the person who asked, I have a natural downturn to my mouth. That's just the way my mouth is shaped. And so I have to work extra hard knowing what to do with my face when I am not speaking. So mine is this.
That's good. But
And you just hold it. So it's mouth together, and it's finding a pleasant look that doesn't look forced or pulled. So what people should do is practice in front of a mirror. Look in a mirror. Find something that looks pleasant and not forced. Memorize the feel of it. It won't feel natural, but when you know that that works, you're more confident in using it in a public speech or in a media interview.
That makes a lot of sense. But presumably, though, if you're depending on the topic you're speaking on, you may want to look more serious. Am I right in thinking? Say you're interviewing on COVID-19 or something like that. You may want to look more serious. Or is the smile still okay?
I think a smile is always okay when they're saying your name. To say, Beverly, thank you for being on the show, then I would smile. If you can have a pleasant look about anything other than death, pretty much. Yeah. So COVID would fit into that. When I've done interviews on somebody dying, or a year and a half ago there's a lot on sexual harassment, I still would have a mouth that wasn't downturned. It is a smaller, pleasant look. So yes, you do have to adjust some depending on the seriousness of the topic. But for the majority of topics, you should actually have that pleasant look.
That's good. And in the UK, we call that the pub test, right?
Oh.
So does this person seem like somebody I'd want to have a beer with? Or a soda if you don't drink.
Yeah, exactly.
And that makes a lot of sense. And the politician that passes the pub test, and there's several politicians on all sides, I think Obama was very good at this, is often the one that can win the audience.
So speaking of pints, there's the pub, one client I worked with years ago, he would get really nervous in interviews, and he said, but I'm struggling with something. He said, I go to the pub and have a few pints, but then my cheeks are red. What do I do? And I said, don't have as many pints before you go on.
That's probably good advice.
Yeah.
Just don't drink before going on television.
Yes.
If the audience walk away with one thing, it should be that.
Yes.
Another question here, and this is going back to the outfits as well. Jewelry. So Debbie asked, what about jewelry for women on camera? But I'll extend that for men as well. So
Sure.
just in general, those accessories.
Accessories can be distracting. I'm going to start with men first, and then I'll get to Debbie's question. The accessory I see men use quite often is the lapel pin. I'm so anti-lapel pin, and I get a lot of pushback on that. For the most part, unless it's the American flag pin, nobody can make out what it is. And if you're on TV, they're going to put what's called a chyron, but it's basically a graphic that's going to explain who you're with, so you don't need to worry about wearing it. What men do have to worry about as well is, so a suit jacket like you're wearing has plastic buttons, but if you ever did a blazer that has brass buttons, if you're at a table and you're gesturing, you can hear the click, click, click. So you want to avoid that. For women, there are more accessories women can wear that can be distracting. The general rules, I would say, are this: it shouldn't make noise, number one. So please don't wear bracelets that are going to be hitting each other. Like a charm bracelet is awful for a media interview. You would hear all of that sound, so no noise. The other thing would be is that it shouldn't reflect light. So I've seen sometimes women will wear big pendants that have like a monogram on it, but it's a flat silver medallion. That just reflects light like crazy. So don't reflect light, and your jewelry shouldn't move. So a long necklace, that's going to move as you move, is distracting. Really dangling earrings could be distracting. In general, subtle is going to be best on camera.
That makes a lot of sense. I almost wore a very large watch this morning.
I thought you were going to say dangling earrings.
those two. I took those off as well.
Okay.
No, I almost wore a big watch
Yeah.
today, and I remembered your advice on that, and I think that's really important. This is actually, and this one's from Claudia, and I tell you, this is one I suffer with doing Zoom presentations. Glasses. I get very self-conscious because sometimes if I wear glasses during an interview, I can see the light reflecting off of them. And Claudia here has the same problem. What do you advise? Do you take them off and go blind, or like me, wear contacts today?
You can wear contacts. If you have a way to avoid it, do it. But if someone doesn't feel like themselves, you want to have the glasses. It is more of an issue in these Zoom meetings because the glare off the computer screen is pretty noticeable. Things you can do, try to move yourself a little bit away from the computer screen. Sometimes if you just change your distance from the computer, it can help. It's usually also coming from a light source. So where is the light source from? So if you're using a lamp or the ring light, sometimes you can move it far enough away where you don't see the reflection. But most important would be get lenses with the anti-glare lens to it. So the non-reflective lens is the best thing that I would do. So if you wear glasses all the time, you're not going to feel like yourself without it. You need to use it to read. Keep them on, but try to adjust your light source and get lenses that have non-reflective. Some people just use reading glasses. I've been asked about whether or not you can use reading glasses, and they're kind of on the tip of your nose. They shouldn't be on the tip of your nose. The frames could get right in the way of your eyes, and then people can't see your eyes, which is a problem. If you need to put something on to read, that's fine. Take them off when you're done reading.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. It's really good advice. Another question here from Quentin. How close should you be to the camera, i.e. how large should your head be on screen? That's a very good question.
So I generally think waist up about here. So probably the framing that Jared, who's running the cameras, probably has me zoomed in on right here. Again, you don't want your head to be the only thing seen. I would say generally chest up is what you're going for your computer framing.
That makes sense. And you have to hope, presumably the cameraman, if you're in a professional studio, knows at least a little bit of...
Never direct a cameraman.
Okay.
When you're in a studio, let them do their thing. You can always ask them how much is seen if you want. They're going to do their thing. It's when you're doing your own home setup, I would do probably waist and above.
That makes
like
a lot of
chest and above, yeah.
Thank you. Question here from William says that sometimes people pick up on a tone of voice which turns them off unintendedly. What are your suggestions for improving voice tone?
So once again, it starts with probably a mindset and not losing composure. So when people get annoyed with the tone, it's usually because somebody's starting to get angry. So you want to avoid that at all possible. But the other part is thinking through the style that you want to have with your voice. So I try to coach people to be conversational. So I can tell when I coach somebody if they've done theater before, because it's too theatrical. It's almost like they're an orator, like they're delivering to the back of the room some speech, and they're not themselves. And so one of the things with tone you're going to look for is, so since we have a faith-based audience, you don't want to sound like a televangelist who is selling you something. You want to sound like this is a real conversation. This is the way I normally speak. So part of the training I do with people is if they struggle with the tone of their voice and it's sounding forced and fake and not authentic, is I'll play it back for them, something that we record, and I'll say, would your family and friends think that sounds like you? And the answer is usually no. Some people mistakenly think, and I understand why they think this, that I'm coming in as a media trainer to make you sound like whoever we think is great on TV. Actually, what I'm doing is trying to make you sound like you. And it's just when we're uncomfortable in front of a camera, not looking at an audience, we change the way we deliver because we're not comfortable. But what people are looking for, it's the pub test. Does this sound like someone I could sit down and have a drink with?
Yes.
Or do they sound like someone where I get their personality and I understand who they are? That's what you're trying to achieve. So even though you're prepared, it should never sound rehearsed. It should sound off the cuff.
I think that's a really good point, and especially if you're in politics, the assumption is that you are insincere just by the nature of the fact that you're a politician. And I think audiences can be very acute at picking that up.
Yeah.
So knowing how to be authentic and yourself on camera is very important. So I think that's very good advice. Let's see, we have a couple more here. So this is a good question, which is it's from an anonymous attendee who says, finding out if the reporter is friendly or hostile. Is it good to do your research on that reporter in advance, watch YouTube clips? What's a good way to kind of establish that in advance?
Absolutely. You should always do your research, because you also don't want to agree to an interview when it's a satirical site.
Yes.
We've seen some politicians make some mistakes on that. So make sure it's legitimate. Now, I'm not saying don't do an interview because they're going to be hostile towards you, but is it considered a legitimate news outlet, even if you think they are not always fair? So do your research and then read their past articles, whatever you can find, because then that will help you try to determine what type of questions you could be asked.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of this. When I have clients go on, say, Morning Joe on MSNBC, I know that one of the hosts, Mika, on the show, she really hates guns, and she really thinks that we should have taxes on sugary food. So if I have a client who's dealing with those two areas, I just know that she's going to be the one asking the hostile questions, and they're going to be hostile.
Yeah.
So it's the homework side as well, and figuring out what hosts and reporters, what they really care about. It will help prepare you for the type of questions that could come up.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Beverly, that gets us quite nicely to 1 o'clock, but perhaps just before you go, is there for those who want to work with District Media Group and enjoy your trainings and get the benefit of your wisdom, is there a good way that they can reach out to your organization?
So they can Google District Media Group, but we're at www.districtmediagroup.com. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to reach me that way. So that's Bev Hallberg is my handle. Hallberg is 2 L's, so HALLBERG. But reach out to us. We would be happy to talk to you. My email also is beverly@districtmediagroup.com. So if you're somebody who's running for office or somebody who is doing media, maybe an activist, we work with people all across the country. We even do a lot of virtual training these days. So no matter your location, you could always sign up for a training and we could work with you.
That's wonderful. I definitely encourage people to take that up and to work with you. I've benefited from your trainings and
you did very well today.
Thank you. I'm learning. Next time I'll have a purple tie without the
no
the
texture and not too many pints before, which you didn't do.
That's
which
right.
is good.
That's right. I only had 4 before this
Only
training.
4.
I'm joking.
And it's before noon.
That's right. And Bev, this has been such a pleasure, as always, to have you on. Thank you so much for giving your time to the attendees of the Values Voters Summit today. Absolutely loved having you and really appreciate you giving us your time. So thank you very much.
It was fun.
And to all of our attendees, I do want to remind you, if you want to enjoy Leadership Institute trainings and benefit from more of these that we talked about at the beginning of this session, then I strongly encourage you to visit leadershipinstitute.org/training, where you can enjoy a plethora of different trainings in digital skills, communication skills, fundraising, campaign, career skills, you name it, to continue to make you an effective activist and public policy leader in the conservative movement. So that's leadershipinstitute.org/training, and definitely take an opportunity to sign up to some of the trainings available on there. The majority of them are remote at the moment, and so you have the luxury of attending them from the comfort of your own home, which is a nice little perk. So with that, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend the Values Voters Summit training today with the Leadership Institute. It's been such a pleasure working with Family Research Council Action. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, enjoy the rest of the conference, and I hope that you will be able to attend some more Leadership Institute trainings in the future. Thank you, and look forward to meeting you soon.